Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we dig into a stack of sources and pull out those golden nuggets of knowledge just for you. Today, let's start with something really fundamental, almost like, that song from The Lion King.
The circle of life.
Exactly. It's the circle of life. And it really hit me reading our source today, that core message. Life, well, everything, it's cyclical. We just keep coming back around to where we started, don't we?
It's so true. If you love history, you see it everywhere. People say nothing new under the sun, and, well, they're often right. Hairstyles, fashion.
Oh, yeah.
And even really specific creative fields like the guitar pedals we're talking about today, they follow these same kinds of mysterious cycles. It's a pattern in politics, art, tech, you name it.
That's a great point and sets us up perfectly. Today we are doing a deep dive into the, fascinating and definitely cyclical history of guitar pedals. Our mission here is to give you a shortcut, really, to understanding how innovation, culture, business trends, all in this little niche, actually mirror these bigger patterns of human nature.
Yeah, how we tick.
Exactly. We're going to pull out the key insights, the surprising facts, and show you how stuff that feels totally revolutionary now. Often it's just an old idea, finding, new tech or hitting the right cultural moment. And this is all based on some fantastic insights from excerpts from The Circle of Life and Guitar Pedals.
Right. And the big theme, which the author who, by the way, runs a successful pedal company really nails, is this belief in cyclicality. That there's real value in studying how we as people, as creatives, as a society just repeat things.
It's not just academic, is it?
No, not all. He says understanding this actually helps predict what might happen next, maybe even save you some heartache down the line. So we're going to walk through 7 distinct eras of pedal history. Each one has its own vibe, its own driving forces. It reveals what he calls the sociological side of guitar electronics. Should we jump in?
Let's do it. Okay, Era 1,
Yeah.
Genesis. We're talking roughly 1960 to 1968. And the theme, breaking things on purpose.
I like that.
Well, the very first manufactured guitar pedal, the Maestro FZ1 Fuzz Tone, literally came from a studio accident in '61. A Marty Robbins session, of all things.
Really? Marty Robbins?
Yeah. Engineer Glenn Snoddy and his buddy Revis Haas heard this, broken sound on tape from a faulty console channel, and they figured out how to replicate it. They basically crushed a clean guitar signal into this buzzy square wave distortion using transistors.
It's amazing how often innovation starts with an accident. But the interesting part is that FZ1, it just sat there at first.
Right.
Didn't sell.
Right. Gathered dust. Until 1964, when Keith Richards used it on I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Apparently he used its harsh but horn-like tones just as a placeholder for a brass section he envisioned.
But they left it on the final track.
They did.
Yeah.
And suddenly everyone wanted that gnarly, broken guitar sound. So it's a perfect example, like you said, of culture basically forcing an arguably failed product into the spotlight. An unexpected hit song totally changed its trajectory.
That cultural moment was key. And things moved fast after that, didn't they? With fuzz, I mean.
Oh, yeah, super fast. 1965, you get the Sola Sound Tone Bender over in Britain. Engineer Gary Hurst basically took the FC1 apart, figured it out, and made it better. If the FC1 was kind of harsh, the Tone Bender was, the source calls it volcanic, thicker, more saturation. That's the sound of Clapton, Beck, Page.
The British heavyweights.
Exactly. Then 66, the Arbiter Fuzz Face, super simple circuit, 2 transistors in that iconic round box, had a more organic and casual feel, apparently responded to your guitar's volume, how hard you picked. Almost like a living thing.
Hendrix territory, right.
Totally. And speaking of Hendrix 67, Roger Mayer comes up with the Octavia. Adds that psychedelic frequency doubling effect, that high octave fuzz sound. Became a huge part of Hendrix's arsenal.
And it wasn't only fuzz evolving then, was it?
No, good point. 1966, the wah-wah pedal arrives. And get this, it was originally designed for trumpet players.
No way. Trumpet.
Yep. But guys like Hendrix, Zappa, Page got their feet on it, and boom, it became the voice of psychedelia. Then 68, the Univibe. First big non-distortion effect of the decade. That swirling phase and tremolo sound, kind of like a rotating speaker cabinet.
Oh, yeah, that Leslie sound.
Exactly. Hendrix used it on Machine Gun, made the guitar sound like it was breathing. Just incredible textures.
So this whole first era, it's really about tinkerers, DIY experimentation.
Purely. Curious tinkerers who accidentally invented the future, as the source puts it. Pedals were just seen as, accessories, add-on sales for the big guitar companies. Not really an industry in its own right.
Not yet.
But that started changing right around '69 with companies like Electro Harmonix, Color Sound.
Which leads us perfectly into Era 2, the Golden Age, running from about 69 to 77. And I love the comparison here to the Golden Age of comics, because this era really did give us the foundational circuits, the archetypes that we still use today. It's pretty remarkable.
Absolutely. You've got Mike Matthews starting Electro-Harmonics in 68. His goal, he wanted distortion-free sustain.
Which is funny, given what he ended up creating.
Right. His second crack at it resulted in the Big Muff around 69. And that's why the knob still says sustain. It wasn't fuzz exactly. It offered musical sustain with controllable tone shaping. Smoother, more predictable than those early fuzzes.
And it became the sound, didn't it? 70s rock, Gilmour's soaring solo.
Totally. And even modern stuff. Sleep, Smashing Pumpkins, it had legs. Then you've got MXR launching around 74.
That's sort of a script logo phase.
Yeah, their Phase 90, simple 4-stage phaser, just made everything sound underwater in the best possible way, became the absolute king of the 70s. And their distortion plus, that perfected a hard-clipping distortion sound. Really set the template for more modern rock overdrive and distortion tones.
And DoD popped up around then too, right? Making things more affordable.
Yeah, Docile 74. Effects like the 250 overdrive preamp. DoD wasn't afraid to target the bedroom guitarist. They proved there was this huge market for pedals that sounded good but didn't cost a fortune. Really widened the category, made effects way more accessible.
That democratization is a recurring theme, it seems.
Definitely. And then just sneaking in at the end of this era, 1978, the Proco RAT.
Ah, the RAT. Great story.
Total underdog story, yeah.
Huh.
One guy literally in a rodent-infested basement creates this new distortion box. That jagged cutting tone ended up defining everything from punk and grunge right up to modern metal. The RAT also showed how a single product could really go global. You know, information, marketing, it was all starting to travel faster.
And while all this is happening in the US and UK, there's something else brewing over in Japan.
Yes, the first signs.
Roland, which kind of grew out of an earlier company called Acetone, released the CE1 Chorus Ensemble in 1976. This thing was huge. Literally, it was big. But it was the first Bucket Brigade guitar effect.
Bucket Brigade. That's that specific type of analog delay chip, right? Warm, kind of chewy repeats.
Exactly. And the CE1 was the first real chorus vibrato pedal on the market. It took the circuit from their super popular jazz chorus amplifier and put it in a box for guitarists. Lush studio-type sounds. Our source calls this a singularity adapting tech from other gear, and the beginning of this wave of systematic perfection coming from Japan.
Okay, systematic perfection. That perfectly tees up Era 3, the Eastern Empire, running roughly 1977 to 1990, because Japan didn't just, join the party.
They kind of took it over.
Yeah, they took everything from that golden age and just perfected it.
Yeah.
Companies like BISS basically looked at all the scattered ideas and asked, okay, how do we make this better, more streamlined, more reliable?
And the launch of the BISS Compact Series in 1977. I mean, the source isn't exaggerating calling it like Apple releasing the iPhone for pedals. It set a completely new standard.
Their OD1 overdrive was totally different, wasn't it? A radical departure, offered this much more musical, responsive, and quiet experience compared to earlier drives. And the PH1 phaser, the SP1 spectrum, which wasn't even a typical effect, more like a subtle tone shaper.
Yeah, the Spectrum was weird but cool, but Boss S's real genius, arguably, was the user experience.
Oh, totally. Separating the foot switch from the knob so you don't kick your settings.
The LED indicator. Seems obvious now, but it wasn't standard.
Silent electronic switching, no more loud clunk.
A thumb screw for the battery compartment, no screwdriver needed.
They just thought of everything. They basically created the most common standardizations within the effects category almost overnight. Incredible design thinking.
And around the same time, late 70s, designed by Maxon but branded Ibanez, comes the Tube Screamer, the TS-808.
Ah, the legend.
It really exploded in popularity by the early 80s. It borrowed that smooth, soft clipping idea from the Boss S OD1, but crucially, it added tone control and that famous mid-range hump.
Makes your guitar cut through the mix.
Exactly. Smooth compression worked for almost everyone. So the source throws out an estimate. Maybe 50% of all radio songs with an electric guitar from 1980 to 1990 had one, somewhere in the chain.
Wow. That's staggering. Half the songs.
It's an estimate, but it shows the sheer dominance. And then pushing accessibility even further in the 80s, you had companies like Arion.
Right, the super budget stuff.
Their big idea, which seems obvious now, was building pedals in cheaper Asian factories and importing them to the US. Made pedals really affordable for the masses, paved the way for stuff like the Dane Electro plastic pedals in the 90s and, the Amazon clones we see today.
So by the mid-80s, BOS is everywhere. globally.
Dominating. And sadly, some of those American pioneers like EHX and MXR, they actually went bankrupt in this period. Our source points out they'd kind of disregarded BSS pedals as a trend, thought it wouldn't last.
Ouch. Miscalculation.
Big time.
Yeah.
Japan had fundamentally shifted pedals from this cottage industry of craftsmanship into a mass market consumer category, almost like toys you'd find in Kmart, but good ones. 80s advertising made them collectible, fun novelties.
It's that efficiency and accessibility drive again. But, as the author notes,
systematic perfection eventually breeds rebellion.
Exactly. Which brings us right to Era 4. Renaissance, 1991 to 1999, the boutique rebirth. The message was basically, okay, corporate efficiency is great, but it kind of killed the soul. Let's bring back the magic.
And the Klon Centaur, emerging around 95 from Bill Finnegan, just embodied this whole spirit, didn't it?
Totally. Sonically, it was this cool thing between a clean boost and a gentle overdrive, kind of tube screamer-ish, but also more transparent. But the real statement was the look, the feel.
Huge enclosure, right. Twice the size of a Barres.
Yep. Hand-etched artwork of a centaur, premium parts inside. It was conceived as a work of art. Everything about it, even the offset foot switch, the LED placement, felt deliberately anti-corporate. It was a statement piece.
A reaction, definitely. And then you had George Tripp's with way huge pedals.
Right. His angle was slightly different. He took those cool vintage 70s circuits, but updated them with modern reliability. Like the swollen pickle fuzz, it's basically a big muff concept, but with added clipping options, a filter control. Honoring the past, but tweaking it.
And those quirky names, Aquapus, Fat Sandwich.
Yeah, and hand-stamped serial numbers. It was all about personality over corporate polish. Then you had Love Tone in the UK, pushing the experimental envelope.
Oh man, Love Tone, wild stuff.
Totally unique circuits like the cheese source, this crazy fizz-octave thing.
Yeah.
Psychedelic graphics, just pure nonsensical brilliance, as the source calls it. Two guys doing whatever they wanted, flanker with no name, ring thing. Just bonkers creativity.
And Mike Fuller's Full Tone showed another approach, improving the classics. The Full Drive took the tube screamer idea.
Added more options.
Yeah, a voicing switch, better components, that second foot switch for more game. It was familiar, but arguably better. And the guitar magazines, which were huge back then, really helped guys like Fuller sell pedals.
Right, print media was still king for gearheads.
But here's that key point again. This boutique thing wasn't born in the 90s, it was reborn. The original boutique era was really the 60s, you know? Those early Voxwas, the tone benders from Macari's, they were more craft project than guitar pedal empire.
So the 90s was like hitting repeat.
Exactly. They hit repeat on how it all started, but while they were at it, they changed the key of the song as well. Same cycle, different flavor.
History repeating, but with a twist.
Yeah.
Okay, so that sets the stage for Era 5. Disruption, running from 2000 to 2010. And the author, whose own company started around here, describes it as just chaos. 3 huge things hit at once. Internet direct sales, digital finally getting accepted, and totally new economic models.
And that digital acceptance piece, you really have to point to the Line 6 DL4, which actually came out right at the end of 99.
The green beast.
Yeah. Before that, digital effects often got a bad rap, sounded sterile or whatever. But the DL4, it just worked. It had reverse delays, tape echo sounds, tube echo simulations, even a looper, all in one reliable box. The source basically says, remove this one pedal, and the pedal world we have now ceases to exist.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
It is, but probably true. And interestingly, that green enclosure, it was a deliberate nod, an homage to the MXR analog delay. Looked familiar, but did things that were impossible for analog. Brilliant move, really.
So the DL4 cracked the door open for digital.
Blew it open, and that allowed companies like Earthquaker devices to come in with a totally different philosophy. They embraced affordable digital signal processing, DSP, not to just copy analog stuff, but to create entirely new sounds.
Yeah, pedals like the Rainbow Machine, Dispatch Master, Disaster Transport.
Yeah.
Completely unique textures.
Exactly. They proved you could be experimental and digital without just chasing vintage tones, using modern tools to make sounds that felt weirdly timeless in their own way.
And the internet changed everything for selling these things.
Oh, massively. The author shares a story about running what he thinks was the first Black Friday guitar pedal sale via Twitter back in 2008, selling some simple booster pedals for like $75.
Right.
The internet just democratized marketing as much as manufacturing. Small builders could suddenly reach anyone anywhere.
Bypassing the old gatekeepers, the stores, the distributors.
Right. But all this disruption, it naturally caused friction. You started seeing Chinese companies pop up on forums, on early social media, offering, $40 versions of $175 boutique pedals.
Ah, the clone wars begin.
Pretty much sparked the first pedal ethics debates.
Oh,
People
yeah.
started taking sides. Analog versus digital, vintage versus reissue, authentic versus clone. Those arguments haven't entirely gone away, have they? Shows how tech and economic shifts always bring up these questions about value authenticity.
Definitely still hear those debates. Okay, so that leads into Era 6, unraveling. This is 2011 to 2020, and this is where those distinctions really start to dissolve.
Yeah, the lines get blurry. And a huge catalyst here was the Strymon timeline, released in 2011. If the DL4 cracked the door, the timeline kicked it off its hinges.
That thing was everywhere.
Instantly. It just destroyed decades-old arguments within its first year. It sounded absolutely fantastic, super reliable, and it was completely digital and worthy of being called professional. 12 different delay types, presets, MIDI-controlled deep editing. It was game over for the digital can't sound good argument.
So that full acceptance of digital just opened the floodgates.
Totally. You saw companies like Chase Bliss Audio emerge, doing incredible stuff, combining real analog circuits with digital control.
Right, so you get the analog sound plus presets, complex modulation, stuff you just couldn't do purely analog. Their warped vinyl vibrato pedal, the source calls it earth-shaking.
It really was. And Maris, started by guys who'd worked at Line 6 and Strymon, making pedals with, the power of a computer but the feeling of something still accessible. This hybrid approach was a huge leap.
And manufacturing changed, too, didn't it? The author talks about switching his own company over to surface mount components.
Yeah, SMT, smaller parts, often machine placed, leads to lower noise, easier manufacturing, usually more cost-effective. But the interesting thing he notes was the reaction from players. Or rather, the lack of reaction.
People didn't care about the old through-hole components being more pure or whatever.
Apparently not, for the most part. As long as the pedal sounded great and was reliable, players simply didn't care anymore about that stuff. It shows how sometimes evolution isn't always a choice. Market realities push things forward.
That's fascinating. Consumer priorities really shifted. He also mentions a Q&A panel back in 2012.
Ah, yeah, where he kind of redefined boutique.
Exactly. He said his company wasn't boutique anymore because of their size, number of employees, and he actively pushed back against the negative sides, sometimes associated with boutique, long wait times, iffy customer service, maybe a bit of snobbery.
Right, the less glamorous side.
He said it ruffled a few feathers, but felt it was the right call. Led to this healthy divide between the old and new ideologies of what a pedal company could be. And even the big established companies had to adapt. EHX started reissuing classics like the Big Muff, but also put out complex digital stuff like the Super Ego synth engine. BOS updated icons like the Blues Driver, but also did multi-effects in their standard pedal size.
Everyone was adapting. So by the end of this era, around 2020, those old dividing lines, they just dissolved. Boutique versus mass market, analog versus digital, the old ways of categorizing things just lost their organizing power. Everything was kind of working, but the old framework didn't really make sense anymore.
A classic paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Which brings us crashing into Era 7, Reconstruction, 2021 to right now. And, well, the pandemic looms large here.
Absolutely. Everything just stopped. Shows canceled, supply chains went haywire.
Yeah, getting parts became a nightmare.
It forced everyone to completely reimagine how things work. It felt like the rules of the old era had been erased.
And the author poses a really interesting question here. Maybe this isn't just the next cycle starting.
Right, maybe something bigger, a secular cycle, one of those really long 50 or 100-year transformations. Moving from the entire founding era of pedals, from the 60s up to the 2020s, into something structurally different.
That's a heavy thought. And you see hints of it, maybe. Because we're not just reviving old ideas or perfecting them now, we seem to be fundamentally reimagining what a guitar effect can be.
Like the Empress of Fetazoya.
Exactly. It's basically a modular synthesizer in pedal format. You can program it to be almost any effect imaginable. It's a complete break from the one-box, one-sound tradition.
Yeah.
Or even the author's own JHS kits.
The IKEA pedal idea?
Yeah. Build it yourself. These ideas, the source argues, have never been seen before because the pressures and influences that formed them have never existed until now. New pressures, new solutions.
And the market dynamics are weird now, too. The author points out that, arguably, the first viral pedal was a box that makes the sounds of farts.
Seriously?
Yep. It speaks volumes about how attention makes money in this current era. Just doing the same old thing, even if it's great, might not be enough to cut through the noise. Novelty and internet culture are huge drivers.
So how do companies navigate that? The author mentions his approach focuses on accessibility and value, like the JHS3 series, aiming for professional results at affordable prices, like $99, without cutting corners on quality.
Right, and the legends of fuzz, updating vintage circuits but making them reliable for today.
It makes that old boutique versus mass market line seem totally irrelevant, doesn't it? When the $99 pedal sounds as good as the $300 one, who cares about the category? The customer decides. It's a real democratization of quality.
And the digital side keeps expanding in unexpected ways. His company, JHS, now sells computer plug-in versions of their pedals. They've even sold digital profiles of their analog amp collection. These were just unfathomable products to think about happening 10 years ago.
Totally unfathomable.
The tools are just democratized now. Bedroom producers have access to sounds that used to cost a fortune in studio time. Those barriers between being a player and a creator, they've largely disappeared. We just have this unprecedented palette of ideas to play with.
It's an exciting time, for sure. So, what's next? If these eras used to last, say, 8 to 12 years, does that still hold? Things seem to move so much faster now.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Pedals don't exist in a bubble. Tech accelerates. The internet spreads ideas instantly.
And we've got new pressures, too.
Exactly. Inflation, job markets, even government stuff like tariffs, these create obstacles we've never faced before in this little world. And those new obstacles will inevitably force new and unique solutions.
We're already seeing weird trends nobody predicted.
Yeah.
Right? Like using an old 90s Tascam tape recorder as a distortion pedal.
Yeah. The JHS pedal based on that, the 424 game stage, that product would have been laughed off the shelves in any previous era now. It's cool. It just shows how unpredictable things are and how inspiration can come from anywhere, often looking backwards in unexpected ways.
It just keeps reinforcing that cycle, doesn't it? We go in circles. We end up back where we started, maybe kicking ourselves for not seeing it coming. But each time around, it's like an edit.
That's a great analogy. Reading the first draft and then the second, third, fourth.
Yeah. Same story, same chapter, but it changes just enough each time. It gets tighter, more interesting.
But maybe, and this is where the author leaves us with a provocative thought, maybe this cyclicality is deeper this time. Maybe cycles don't always restart that quickly.
Meaning
Maybe things have to completely unravel first before something genuinely, fundamentally new can emerge. And maybe that unraveling takes longer than just one generation, one 10-year cycle. We might not just be seeing the next little revolution. We could be in the slow, messy birth of an entirely new epoch for effects.
Wow. Okay. That's a lot to think about.
Definitely. So, just to wrap up, we've seen how this niche world of guitar pedals is actually this amazing microcosm, illustrating these universal patterns: innovation, culture, economics, rebellion, rebirth. Understanding these cycles, it's not just for guitar nerds, right? It gives you real insight into how any field, any industry evolved and reinvents itself.
Absolutely. So, listening to all this, what stands out to you? How do you see these cycles repeating, adapting, maybe even breaking in other parts of your own life or your work?
It's worth pondering because that circle, it keeps turning. What old idea is just sitting there waiting for the right tech, the right cultural moment to suddenly become the next big thing? And are we, right now, maybe in the middle of one of those slow burn foundational shifts that could truly redefine what's possible in music and maybe beyond?
Lots to chew on there. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and definitely keep listening for those echoes of the past and the sounds of tomorrow. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of sources and really unpack the ideas that shake things up in a field. Today, we are definitely strapping in for a stompbox revolution. We're focusing not just on the legendary sounds from one company, but really how that company fundamentally dictated the shape, the format, the whole practical reality of electric guitar gear for, the next 50 years?
It's absolutely right. Yeah, we're diving deep into MXR, a company often listed as, I think, the 9th major player in that sort of first wave of commercial pedals back in the early 70s. And when you look at the gear back then, a lot of it was big, kind of fragile, often really cumbersome, almost like a repurposed lab gear sometimes. But MXR, they showed up with a completely different idea about industrial design.
Right. So our mission today is to get under the hood of that shift. How did this small operation, just two engineers up in New York, how did they manage to standardize an entire global industry footprint? That's huge. We're going to unpack the specific design choices, those iconic sounds distortion, plus Syn Phase 90, the ones and the players who made them famous, and also track the, frankly, surprising resilience of the brand. I mean, they went bankrupt, but came back stronger than ever.
It's a really fascinating story, and it's a great case study in just how critical industrial design is, even in a creative field like music, because you had companies like Electro-Harmonix, Vox, making fantastic effects, no doubt. But often they were in these big, awkward boxes. MXR kind of walked in and just dictated the format. They were the ones who basically said, okay, this is how big a pedal should be, this is how it should look, and here's how tough it needs to be to survive life on the road. They really defined the container itself and that standard. It's still with us today.
Okay, let's dig into that blueprint. Where did this whole standardization thing really begin? It starts, like you said, in Rochester, New York, 1972, founded by Terry Sherwood and Keith Barr. And these weren't just, musicians tinkering in a garage. This sounds like it was an engineering venture from day one.
Oh, absolutely. And the location, Rochester, that tells you something too. Back then, Rochester was a major hub for optics, high-tech stuff, advanced electronics manufacturing, think Kodak, think Xerox. Sherwood and Barr came out of that environment. So they weren't just good with the soldering iron. These were engineers who understood mass production, reliability, efficient design.
Right, that technical background. Mm-hmm. And Keith Barr's involvement, especially. That gives us a real clue about MXR's impact, doesn't it? Because he didn't just stop there.
Exactly. That's a key insight nugget right there. If you want proof of Barr's design vision, just look where he went after MXR. Keith Barr co-founded Alesis in the 80s. And Alesis, they were huge in making pro-level digital studio gear synths, drum machines, effects processors affordable for the home studio room. It was the same philosophy, really. Take complex, expensive tech and package it smart. Make it compact, reliable, and price it so regular musicians could actually buy it. That whole approach, that powered MXR's early focus on ruggedness and standardization.
So the goal wasn't just making cool sounds. It was solving a real practical problem for working musicians. Let's zone in on that core MXR philosophy. What were they aiming for that others maybe weren't prioritizing?
Well, their philosophy seems built on 3 pillars, really aimed squarely at the touring musician: ruggedness, compactness, and affordability. These things were designed specifically engineered to be road warriors. They had to survive getting tossed in gig bags, dropped, beer spilled on them, and maybe most importantly, getting stomped on night after night on a dark stage. They had to be tough.
That sounds like a direct answer to what was out there at the time. Could you paint a picture of what the competition's gear actually looked like? We hear bulky, but what did that mean for a guitarist trying to actually use this stuff live?
Oh, it meant headaches, basically. Yeah, you had contemporaries like Electro-Harmonix, EHX, or Musitronics, and they made some incredible sounding effects, really groundbreaking stuff. Think of the big muff fuzz, often in a big sort of clunky metal box, or the Mutron filters. Those things were massive, often needed their own special power supply. They were just bulky, took up tons of space on stage, sometimes felt more like studio gear, not really optimized for getting kicked around. MXR saw that and decided to shrink everything down.
That's the key difference, isn't it? They saw a problem with the physical form, not just the circuit inside. They realized maybe the biggest issue wasn't just the sound, but being able to reliably use that sound night after night.
Exactly right. And that's where they moved beyond just being another effects company and really started setting the standard. The moment they introduced that distinctive small rectangular box, usually made from tough die-cast aluminum, and crucially, designed so you could line them up neatly, they weren't just selling a product, they were setting the industrial standards.
So let's get specific on that design innovation. What were the actual dimensions we were talking about? That little rectangle became the benchmark.
Yeah, the classic MXR box was famously compact, something like 4.4 inches long by 2.4 inches wide, roughly. Now, that might just sound like numbers, but the genius was it optimized 2 things: minimal pedal board space and just enough room inside for a 9-volt battery, which was huge back then. Prioritizing that small footprint, usually just 1 or 2 big, sturdy knobs, tough foot switches. It was pure efficiency. And that minimalist design, focused on durability and space, that became the de facto standard for guitar pedals, full stop.
Wow. So this is really the moment MXR standardized the whole industry's footprint. So when you look at almost any pedal board today, doesn't matter if it's cheap stuff or fancy boutique pedals, the physical size, the way they line up, that rectangular shape, it all traces back to that 72 Rochester design. It's like a design language focused purely on the essentials. And it worked because it solved a massive practical problem for musicians on the road.
Yeah.
You could suddenly carry, 3 or 4 effects in the space 1 or 2 used to take up?
Right, so they perfected the container. Now let's talk about what they put inside it. MXR very quickly cemented its reputation, defining the sound of 70s rock. This section's all about those core releases, the Phase 90 and the Distortion Plus Metal Way. These were the absolute pillars of early MXR. They established that whole reputation, simple design, built like a tank, and crucially, great tone that was instantly usable. No manual needed, really.
Let's start with the one everyone pictures first. The Phase 90, that bright orange box. MXR's debut pedal, 1974, right? And just a masterpiece of simplicity.
It really is. Technically, the Phase 90 is a 4-stage phaser. Now, for anyone listening who's not sure what phasing is, think of it as that dynamic, sweeping, whooshing sound. It splits your signal, shifts the phase of one part, mixes it back, creates these sort of peaks and valleys moving through the sound. 4 stages was kind of the sweet spot, warm, noticeable movement, but not too overpowering.
But the real genius, connecting back to that MXR philosophy, was the interface, or lack thereof.
Exactly. It just had one knob. Speed. That's it. You plug in, turn the knob, and you get that sound, that swooshing, shimmering thing. Think about other modulation effects back then, like the Univibe. Multiple controls, big treadle pedal. The Phase 90 packed all that sophisticated phasing circuitry into this simple orange box.
And the cultural impact, it's hard to overstate it. When you think of iconic rock guitar tones, the Phase 90 sound is right up there.
Oh, absolutely. You just cannot talk about the Phase 90 without mentioning Eddie Van Halen. It's all over Eruption, right? And his early records, he often ran it right into a cranked Marshall amp. It gave his clean tones that liquid shimmer, and his distorted tones got that unique, throaty kind of growl and swirl. It wasn't just an effect for him, it was part of his core sound.
I think that simplicity, just having one knob, is maybe underappreciated today when pedals have 10 controls and dip switches.
That simplicity was the feature, like you said. By limiting it to one control, they basically guaranteed that wherever you set that knob, the sound was musical, it was consistent, it was recognizably that Phase 90 sound. It gave musicians one clear parameter for expression instead of getting lost tweaking. Very performance-focused.
Okay, so that's motion. Let's switch gears to their other huge early release, the Distortion Plus A, which actually came out a year earlier, 1973.
That's right, the Distortion Plus S. This gave them a foothold in the gain world, but with a different flavor. It wasn't like the typical fuzzes of the day, think fuzz face or big muff, which were often thick and woolly sounding. The Distortion Plus was different. It's based on op-amp clipping.
Okay, hang on. Op-amp clipping. Let's break that down simply. What is that, and why does it sound different?
Good question. It's key. Op-amp just means operational amplifier. It's a tiny integrated circuit, basically designed to boost a signal. In the Distortion Plus dot, the circuit is designed to push that op-amp really hard, to intentionally overdrive it, clip the signal waveform aggressively, often using diodes. And the sound of op-amp clipping, it's generally more compressed, more focused, maybe a bit more articulate than, say, the smooth saturation you get from fuzz pedals using transistors.
So it delivers a specific kind of grit. Sharper, more focused, less smooth maybe, more aggressive.
Precisely. If the Phase 90 was about movement, the Distortion Plus was about sharp, almost surgical grit. It became a favorite of guys like Randy Rhoads, for his tight, palm-muted middle tones with Ozzy. Super focused sound. It was also huge with early punk and new wave players who wanted that raw, biting edge without the sort of blurry sound of some older fuzzes.
It's really impressive how quickly they built out a whole lineup in the mid-70s. They didn't just sit on those 2 hits, they expanded fast like they were trying to fill every essential slot on the board.
Yeah, they were smart. They immediately leveraged the Phase 90's success with spin-off, created a kind of tiered modulation line. You had the Phase 45, that was a subtler 2-stage version, probably for players who wanted just a hint of movement, maybe cleaner stuff. Then they went the other way with the Phase 100. That was more complex, 6 stages, I think, with extra controls for much deeper, swirly, more experimental sounds. Same core idea, just scaled up and down.
And then comes another absolute giant, arguably as important in its category as the Distortion Plus was for gain, the Dynacomp, 1976.
Oh, the Dynacomp, yeah. Huge piece of gear history, still everywhere today. It was one of the first really widely available compression pedals specifically for guitarists, and it's famous for that specific squishy sound, that really noticeable snap at the start of the note, the sort of pump, and then massive sustain. Makes notes just jump out and ring forever.
Can we unpack that squishy sound a bit more? Compression can be confusing. Why is the Dynacomp's particular compression so famous?
That's a great point. See, a lot of high-end studio compressors, they aim for transparency. They use fancy circuits, VCAs, to control dynamics without really changing the tone much. The Dynacomp, though, uses a specific type of circuit based on FETs, an early kind of compression tech, and it's anything but transparent. It grabs the start of the note really hard, clamps down the volume, and then boosts the heck out of the tail end as the note fades. That really audible signal manipulation, that hard pop, and the long sustain, that's the squish or pump people talk about.
So that aggressive character became a feature, not a bug. It actually defined some genres.
Absolutely. It immediately became a staple in country music. You need that consistent, clean volume and that sharp, snappy sustain for chicken picking, right? Dynacomp delivered that. And funk music, too, for those clean, rhythmic parts where every note needs equal punch. It's still kind of the benchmark for that specific, very audible compression sound.
We should also mention the weirder side of MXR, though. They weren't just about utility. They offered some truly out there sounds, but still in that reliable box, like the Blue Box from '74.
The Blue Box, yeah. Perfect example of their wild side. It's fuzz mixed with this weird 2-octave down effect, and it's famously chaotic, tracks notes kind of badly, spits, sputters. It often sounds less like a guitar and more like a synth bass that's about to explode. People say you have to kind of fight it to get something usable.
But when you do tame it, the results are iconic.
No doubt. The classic example is Jimmy Page. He used the Blue Box on Fool in the Rain. That thick, kind of syrupy subterranean sound on the main riff, that's pure Blue Box. It proved MXR wasn't just making meat and potatoes effects. They were willing to get experimental and push boundaries, too.
That leads nicely into utility and innovation. This is where MXR started building the idea of the modern pedal chain, not just individual effects, things that weren't really effects, but signal tools.
That's a really key distinction. Take the microamp. Super simple, one knob, clean boost pedal. Its influence is just massive because it really helped establish the idea of the always-on pedal. Before, pedals were mostly for solos or specific parts. The microamp wasn't about adding a crazy sound. It was about adding subtle, always-on volume, or maybe pushing an amp harder, or making up for signal loss in a chain. Just a brilliant piece of utility.
And beyond simple boosts, they tackled really complex studio effects,
Yeah.
shrinking them down using new tech to fit that standard box.
This might be their biggest technical achievement in the 70s, honestly. MXR pioneered compact versions of the flanger, and crucially, analog delay. Before MXR, analog delay usually meant big, fragile tape echo machines, like an Echoplex or huge, expensive rack units. MXR basically democratized analog delay for the masses.
How'd they do that? How did they shrink something that complex into, an orange box?
They used what was then brand new tech. Bucket brigade chips, or BBDs. Okay, simple analogy time for listeners. Imagine a line of tiny buckets. They're actually capacitors. The guitar signal comes in, each bucket holds a little piece of the electrical charge and then passes it down the line to the next bucket, one after another, in time. That process takes time, right? That delay in passing the signal is the echo.
Okay, that's a great way to picture it.
And the crucial part is every time the signal gets passed from one bucket to the next, it loses a tiny bit of high-frequency detail. It degrades slightly. That intentional characteristic decay is what gives analog delay its signature sound, warm, dark repeats that kind of melt away, unlike the perfect copies you get from digital delay. Using BBDs, MXR brought these complex modulation sounds and true analog delay into a small, affordable stomp box. It totally changed what was possible live.
And while they were building this arsenal of sounds and tools, they were also nailing the branding with that color coding. Ties right back to that performance-first idea.
Oh yeah, classic practical design becoming brilliant branding. MXR used bold, solid colors for instant recognition. Think about it. You're on a dark stage, maybe some smoke, lights flashing. You need to know instantly which pedal you're stomping on. You don't have time to read labels. It's visual shorthand. Orange is phase 90, yellow is distortion plus denier, red is Dynacomp, blue is Blue Box. Simple, effective.
They weren't just selling circuits. They were selling instantly identifiable tools. That color coding really cemented their look, made them recognizable on any stage, anywhere, even from the back of the room.
So by the mid to late 70s, MXR wasn't just innovative, they were dominant. Culturally, market-wise, their pedals basically became the default US stomp boxes for that whole era. Really, a global standard.
It seems like they hit that sweet spot, adopted across all kinds of genres. We've mentioned some names, but the sheer breadth of players using them is pretty staggering.
It really covers the map. You've got sonic architects like David Gilmour using their phasers and delays for those huge Pink Floyd soundscapes. Then hard rock guys like Van Halen, obviously. Jam band heroes like Jerry Garcia, who apparently loved the Dynacomp and Microamp for their clean utility and signal management. Even huge mainstream acts like Tom Petty relied on them. It just shows that core philosophy, small, tough, simple, was exactly what touring pros and studio guys needed. Reliable, good-sounding tools.
And the competition noticed. They started copying that format, right?
Absolutely. That widespread use just confirmed how right they got the industrial design. That physical footprint was so practical, so successful that future giants basically copied it. When Boss, Roland, enters the market big time in the late 70s and really takes over in the 80s, their compact pedal chassis, it's clearly modeled on the MXR standard, just with their own tweaks. MXR really laid down the template for the modern pedal.
But, as history often shows, even dominant players can stumble. Despite all that success, MXR hit a major wall in the 1980s. What happened? What was the turning point that led to their decline and eventually bankruptcy?
Yeah, the decline. It's kind of a classic story of a pioneer getting overtaken by competitors who innovated on, convenience features, really. As Boss ramped up their global production, they introduced some key technical upgrades that MXR's simple, almost Spartan design philosophy lacked. MXR had prioritized simplicity, maybe sonic purity above all else. But the market, especially as pedal boards got bigger, started demanding more convenience and better signal chain reliability.
Okay, so it became a technical gap. What specifically did Boss bring to the table that MXR was missing that kind of forced players to look elsewhere?
Two main things, really, and one seems incredibly basic now. Buffered bypass and status LEDs. MXR traditionally used what's called true bypass, which means when the pedal's off, the signal goes straight through, completely bypassing the circuit. Guitar purists often love that. Theoretically preserves tone. Boss, however, introduced buffered bypass.
Let's define that simply. Buffered bypass. Why was this such a big deal as pedal boards started growing in the 80s?
Okay, so think about the signal coming out of your guitar. It's actually pretty weak, technically high impedance. Every foot of cable, every connection, it degrades that signal a tiny bit, especially the high frequencies. People call it tone suck. Now, in the 70s, with maybe 2 or 3 pedals, not a huge deal. But in the 80s, guys started having 8, 10, even more pedals. That signal loss became a major problem. A buffered bypass pedal, even when it's off, has a tiny built-in preamp the buffer that constantly strengthens and conditions the signal. It acts like a signal booster along the chain, ensuring a strong, clear signal reaches the amp, no matter how many pedals or how much cable you have.
Oh, okay. So MXR was sticking with the pure true bypass idea, but Boss offered the practical fix for these increasingly complex rigs.
Exactly. For the average player dealing with long cables and lots of pedals, the tiny theoretical benefit of true bypass just wasn't worth the signal getting weak and muddy. Buffered bypass solved a very real problem.
And then the second missing feature, the LED. Seems so obvious now.
Right. It almost sounds funny today, but it was critical. Those classic 70s MXR pedals. No light to tell you if they were on or off, seriously. You were relying totally on your ears. And on a loud, dark, chaotic stage, that just wasn't reliable enough. Did you accidentally kick the Dynacomp off? You wouldn't know until your clean tone suddenly disappeared mid-song.
Wow, I'm picturing Van Halen on some huge stage, smoke machines going, how did they even manage without knowing if a pedal is on?
Intense focus, I guess. And probably marking settings with tape, relying on muscle memory. But the LED, which Boss and others introduced, that was a game-changing quality of life upgrade, instant visual confirmation. MXR started losing ground fast because they didn't adopt these modern conveniences. They had pioneered the format, but they kind of stalled on improving the interface. And yeah, they struggled financially and went bankrupt by the mid-80s.
That's a really powerful lesson, isn't it? Sometimes those small practical things, a light, a buffer, matter more to the mass market than the core sound itself.
Yeah.
But bankruptcy wasn't the end of the story for MXR. The core circuits were just too good to disappear.
Exactly. And that brings us to the revival under Jim Dunlop. Dunlop, already famous for picks, capos, the crybaby wah, they acquired the MXR name in 1987. And this was a brilliant move. Dunlop saw that even though the company had failed, the actual pedal designs, the circuits, the brand identity, those colored boxes were pure gold.
So what was Dunlop's strategy? How did they bring the brand back without losing that vintage magic?
Their first move was smart. Commit to authenticity. They reissued the big 3 classics, Phase 90, Distortion plus Dynacomp. brought those original sounds back to the market, tapping into all that nostalgia and timeless tone. But crucially, they did add the modern features everyone now expected: reliable power jacks and, yes, status LEDs. But they made sure the core sonic engine, the actual circuit heart, stayed true to the originals.
And now, under Dunlop, MXR isn't just a retro brand. They've managed to balance that heritage with a lot of modern innovation, too.
Absolutely. Dunlop proved the enduring relevance of that MXR standard by massively expanding the line. They used that same compact format for totally new 21st century designs. The carbon copy delay is a perfect example, became one of the best-selling analog delays ever, capturing that warm BBD sound in the classic MXR footprint. They've also done great artist collaborations like the EVH signature pedals, and they keep putting out new stuff: analog, digital hybrids, catering to modern players. MXR today is arguably stronger and more respected than ever, which just shows how fundamentally right those original designs were.
Okay, so we've gone through the founding, the tech, the sounds, the cultural peak, the fall, the comeback. What are the big takeaways here? Why does MXR, a company started over 50 years ago, still matter so much today, even if you don't personally use their pedals?
I think the absolute most critical point, the one everything else flows from, is that MXR standardized the industry format, period. Before them, it was kind of the Wild West for pedal sizes and shapes. After MXR, there was a blueprint. Their small, tough, colorful die-cast box set the standard, that mini format that still dominates pedal boards. Every company making a standard rectangular stomp box today, they're working within the framework Barr and Sherwood laid out back in '72. They didn't just make a product, they basically created the global template for what a pedal is.
And it wasn't just the box itself. The stuff inside that box has proven incredibly timeless, too.
Exactly. That's the second big takeaway. The enduring quality of those original circuits, it's just proof of brilliant engineering. The Phase 90, the Distortion Placette, the Dynacomp, they're still being made, still selling well, and fundamentally, they're almost unchanged at their core after nearly 50 years. That's almost unheard of for consumer electronics. They just nailed those foundational sounds for modulation, drive, and compression. They became reference points.
And by making them affordable and tough, they really changed how musicians used effects. They democratized the whole thing.
Right. That focus on accessibility and reliability is key. They took effects out of just high-end studios or custom rigs and put them onto stages everywhere, into the hands of regular working musicians. They made effects accessible, reliable, built for the gigging player. That really fueled the mass adoption of pedals on tour. Before MXR, having cool effects might have been a luxury. After MXR, it started to become an expectation. You look at photos of bands from the late 70s, 80s, you see those colorful little boxes everywhere because they were the workhorse tools. Maximum bang for your buck, maximum reliability.
And finally, the fact that the brand survived bankruptcy and is now thriving under Dunlop, that says a lot about the strength of those original ideas.
It really does. It shows that if you get the industrial design right, compact, rugged, and the core tone right, classic, usable, that can be powerful enough to overcome even major business failure, the core engineering and the brand identity were just too good, too valuable to let disappear. Dunlop recognized that. MXR proved that sometimes, nailing the practical stuff, that technical minimalism can conquer a market. Hashtag tech hats at show.
Well, this has been a really illuminating deep dive. We saw how technical know-how from guys like Barr and Sherwood met this really smart industrial design and ended up standardizing a whole global market for music gear. They didn't just invent sounds. They shifted effects from being these bulky, fragile things into essential, colorful, reliable tools that actually fit on a pedal board.
Yeah, and if you look at pretty much any modern pedal board today, whether it's someone's bedroom setup or a huge pro touring rig, you are looking at the direct industrial legacy of that little company started in Rochester back in 1972. They solved the problems of size, durability, and just getting the stuff out there. And by doing that, they enabled generations of musicians to explore sounds without constantly worrying if their gear would break down.
So here's a final thought to leave you with, and it goes back to that Phase 90. Eddie Van Halen used the MXR Phase 90 to create one of the most iconic, complex, instantly recognizable rock guitar sounds ever. Yet the pedal itself, famously simple, just one single knob, speed. So it raises this question for you to think about next time you see a really minimalist piece of gear. In design, is limiting the options sometimes the actual key? Does forcing the user to focus on playing rather than endless tweaking unlock a kind of pure, repeatable sonic brilliance? Was the simplicity that MXR championed maybe the real secret to their enduring power? Something for you to mull over?
Okay, think about this for a second. A small metal box, right? Maybe weighs a pound, runs off a simple battery. But inside that little thing, it's got the power to totally reshape music, how we even hear a guitar. We're talking about what happens between the guitar and the amp. So today, yeah, we're doing a deep dive into electroharmonics, or EHX, as pretty much everyone calls them. This company is just so central to pedal history. I mean, looking at their old catalogs, it's like reading a timeline of rock, grunge, all sorts of experimental music.
Absolutely. And our mission today really is to pull out the key bits of history, the innovation, the cultural impact EHX had, all from the source material. Think of this dive as your shortcut to getting why this specific company, founded by a guy who used to sell IBM machines, somehow became this massive disruptor in music tech.
An IBM salesman. That's just wild. Mike Matthews, right? Founded EHX in '68 New York City. And apparently it was just because he loved loud rock music and saw a gap in the market. But the fascinating part, their first big hit wasn't some crazy fuzz monster. It was the LPB-1.
Yeah, the LPB-1, linear power booster. Sounds simple, right? It was this tiny, pretty affordable plug-in booster. Its job was just to give guitars a bit more kick, more sustain. But looking at the bigger picture, the LPB-1 proved something huge. It showed you could build a whole successful business just on changing tone, on transforming sound.
Okay, so why is that such a big deal? I mean, Maestro, Vox, Sola Sound, they were making effects too. What made EHX different right from the start?
It really boils down to independence and focus. See, those other companies you mentioned, they were often just like small parts of bigger companies making amps or guitars. Think Gibson, Fender, that sort of thing. Matthews built EHX only to make effects. That was their whole game. They didn't have to worry about selling guitars, so they were free to just experiment. Go nuts, really. And crucially, price things so actual working musicians could buy them.
Right, that freedom. And that allowed them to push pedals way beyond just, basic fuzz and wah, which was kind of the standard in the late 60s. So let's unpack this golden age, the 70s blueprint. What was it about that time, that environment, that let them basically set the stage for modern effects?
Well, 1970s New York City, it was just this melting pot of creativity, maybe a little grimy, and EHX really tapped into that energy. The whole era for them was about bold engineering, sometimes risky stuff, paired with that affordable price point. That was key. They sort of understood that if you made a weird box cheap enough, musicians would buy it, figure it out, and make new sounds with it.
And when you say EHX innovation, you kind of have to start with the Big Muff Pi. Came out in '69. The source material basically calls it the most famous fuzz or distortion pedal ever. Yeah. Why that one? What made the Big Muff the icon when there were tons of fuzz pedals around?
It's just the sheer sound of it, the weight, the sustain. It wasn't just buzzy clipping. It gave you this incredible, almost endless sustain. People call that violin-like quality, especially for solos. And it just crossed genres instantly. You had David Gilmour using it for these soaring, epic leads, but then you also had bands like Sonic Youth using it for pure noise and texture. It could be smooth, or it could just crush you.
And that shows up in the collector's market too, doesn't it? All those later versions, the Ram's Head, Green Russian, Civil Wars, they all have their own followings based on tiny circuit differences.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Huge collector's items. But, the really groundbreaking stuff wasn't just making distortion louder or better. It was bringing sounds into pedal form that used to only exist in big, expensive studios.
Okay, yeah, let's talk modulation. The Small Stone Phaser, 74, that's a classic sound, right? That watery swirl. But the Electric Mistress in 75, this is where, like you said, it gets really interesting.
It's a perfect example of bringing studio tech to the masses. The Electric Mistress, it was the very first flanger in a pedal, period. Now, why is that a big deal? Well, before that pedal, flanging was this physical studio trick. You needed two tape machines playing the same thing, and you'd literally press your finger on the flange, the edge of one tape reel, to slow it down slightly. Creates that whooshing sound.
Wow. So EHX took that complex, manual, tape-based process and somehow crammed it into a little metal box you could stomp on.
Exactly. It made that huge, sweeping jet plane sound available live on stage in real time. It totally changed the economics of getting those sounds. And we can't skip the small clone chorus either. That shimmery, watery sound is just completely tied to Kurt Cobain and the whole sound of Nirvana's Nevermind.
They weren't stopping at modulation, though. They jumped right into melting with time, pitch, even synthesis, basically.
Right. Which brings us to the absolute legend, the Deluxe Memory Man. 1976. This was one of the very first delay pedals to successfully add modulation, like chorus or vibrato, to the repeats. But doing that needed some pretty specific tech for the time. Bucket Brigade chips.
Okay, you hear bucket brigade ships or BBDs thrown around all the time with vintage gear. For someone who's maybe not deep in the tech weeds, what are these things and why were they so important for that classic EHX delay sound?
Okay, think of a BBD like a tiny, tiny assembly line. It's made of miniature capacitors like little buckets. The audio signal, as an electrical charge, gets passed down this line from one bucket to the next, step by step. And because it's an analog process, each step introduces a tiny bit of signal loss, a little softening, a warmth. That's the analog decay people love. It's not a perfect, sterile digital copy like you get today. It's a repeat that sounds, well, organic. It degrades naturally.
That makes total sense. So they nailed analog delay, but then they went totally left field with stuff like the microsynthesizer in the late 70s.
Yeah, the microsynth, that thing was proof they were just way ahead of the curve. It was basically a guitar synthesizer in a pedal. It gave guitar players filters, octave effects, ways to shape the attack of the note. You can make your guitar sound like a synth or horns or whatever. And that kind of expansive thinking led to other really cool, useful niche pedals too, like the Dr. Q. That's an auto wah, right? An envelope filter.
Right, envelope filter. Explain that simply. What is it doing?
It's basically a wah pedal you don't control with your foot. Instead, the wah sound opens and closes based on how loud you play. You're playing dynamics. So the harder you pick, the more the filter opens, gives you that funky quack sound. It reacts to you. And the bass balls pedal, which was like a dual envelope filter, that became a massive hit with bass players for getting that really articulate, funky sound.
So you've got these innovative pedals. They're affordable. They're getting out there. It feels like EHX wasn't just selling gear. They were kind of part of the counterculture.
Absolutely. Yeah, because they were cheap and easy to get. They ended up in the hands of punk bands, new wave artists, experimental folks, people who were actively trying not to sound like the big polished rock bands. The Big Muff logo itself sort of became this symbol. Like if you saw that, you knew it was probably going to be loud and maybe a little abrasive, creative, definitely.
But innovation costs money, and the 80s. Well, the 80s were tough for a lot of independent companies like EHX. What happened? What caused that decline in the mid-80s?
It was kind of a perfect storm, really. Multiple things hit them at once. First, just the cost of making things in the U.S. was going up. Second, they suddenly had really serious, well-funded competition. You had Boss and other Japanese companies flooding the market with reliable, mass-produced pedals. And U.S. companies like MXR were getting leaner, too. And third, this was a killer. The supply chain for key parts started drying up. Remember those bucket brigade chips for the deluxe memory man? They became really hard to get reliably as the industry started shifting towards digital technology. And if you can't build your flagship product consistently, well, your business model kind of falls apart.
So by the mid-80s, they stopped making pedals in the U.S. That sounds like game over. But Mike Matthews, he pulls off this incredible, completely unexpected move. He takes the whole operation essentially overseas.
Yeah, it's an amazing pivot. He started manufacturing pedals again, but also high-quality vacuum tubes over in Russia, under a new name, Sovtek. Sovtek was part of his bigger company, New Sensor. And this wasn't just like typical offshoring to save money. It was a total reinvention born out of pure necessity.
And that Sovtek era, especially the big muffs they made, they became instant cult classics in the 90s, right? The Green Russian, the Civil War muffs.
Oh, yeah. They were different. They were built in Russia, often using whatever parts were available, sometimes these heavy-duty military surplus enclosures. So they were built like tanks, they were cheap, and crucially, they sounded different. A bit darker, maybe heavier, more scooped in the mids than the 70s ones. And that sound, that thick, saturated, heavy sound, was just perfect for what was happening in the 90s with grunge, stoner rock, doom metal. The Sovtek muff basically carried the EHX torch while the original company was in exile.
That survival story is just incredible. So how did they manage to come back, relaunch in New York, thrive again in the 2000s? How did they compete against boutique builders and their own vintage legend status?
Well, their strategy when they relaunched in New York, early 2000s, it was smart. It was this careful balance. They knew they had to bring back the classics. So you got reissues of the Big Muff, the Memory Man, the Small Stone. Got to satisfy the people who want those original sounds.
But they didn't just become a reissue company. They started putting out genuinely new, modern stuff, too. Stuff that used new digital tech, but still felt EHX, like the POG and the HOG. What was the big deal with the POG, the polyphonic octave generator?
Right, the key word there is polyphonic. See, older octave pedals, they could usually only handle one note at a time. If you played a chord, they'd freak out, glitch, sound awful.
Yeah.
The POG let you play a full chord like a G major, and it could accurately track and add octaves both above and below every note in that chord. Suddenly, your 6-string guitar could sound like a 12-string or even like a big Hammond organ.
Whoa, that's a massive leap. From analog bucket brigades to complex polyphonic pitch shifting.
Totally. And other innovations like the freeze pedal or the Super Rego, these let you capture a note or a chord and just sustain it indefinitely, creating these amazing soundscapes. It just shows that Mike Matthews, even today, is still pushing boundaries, still independent, still run by the founder. EHX is now one of the most prolific pedal companies out there. Their catalog is huge, tiny micro pedals all the way up to complex multi-effects beasts.
Yeah, it really is the definition of a survivor brand. So we try and tie this all together. Why does electroharmonics really matter in the grand scheme of music history, beyond just making some cool pedals?
I think you can boil it down to maybe 4 key things. First, they just massively expanded the sounds available to everyday musicians. They took delay, flange, chorus, even synth sounds out of the super expensive studio world and put them into boxes people could actually afford and use live. Democratization, really. Second, the Big Muff Pi. It's not just another pedal, it's a fundamental sound. You could argue it's as iconic culturally as, say, a Stratocaster or a Les Paul is as an instrument. Its sonic footprint is that big. Third, their whole culture of just trying stuff. Fearless innovation, building a synth and a pedal, figuring out how to mimic tape flanging electronically. That whole attitude really set the stage, inspired countless boutique builders who came later. They showed what a stomp box could be. And finally, they're just a true survivor, independent all the way, navigated the 70s boom, the 80s crash, the 90s Russian detour, the digital revolution of the 2000s. And Mike Matthews is still at the helm. It's remarkable.
That persistence, that's maybe the final thought to leave you with. Think about Mike Matthews starting out an IBM salesman. He understood business, scale, distribution, and his relentless drive to make these experimental sounds cheap and accessible fundamentally changed everything. It forced this huge shift. Pro audio tech wasn't just for the rich studios anymore, it was for the kid in the garage. And if you really want to hear that shift in action, go find some recordings specifically using those Soviet-era green Russian big muffs. You'll instantly get why they were so huge, so essential to that heavy 90s alternative sound.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise to give you the essential knowledge on the biggest shifts in tech, culture, and, well, today, it's all about gear.
It is. We are strapping in to look at something that on the surface looks familiar, but is actually a pretty radical shift.
We're talking about the brand new BSS PX1 plug-out FX pedal.
And this is so much more than just a new stomp box. I mean, for anyone who's ever built a pedal board, BOSS.
Yeah.
It's synonymous with those simple, tough, single-purpose analog boxes.
The gold standard of step on it and it works.
Exactly. The PX1 is a fundamental, almost a philosophical pivot for them. It's a digital platform that is very intentionally wearing the clothes of an analog classic.
Absolutely. And this is a company that's been defining guitar tone since, 1977? They've put out over 140 unique models.
And sold something like 19 million of them. It's an incredible legacy.
So our mission today is to unpack this shift. What is the tech behind this convertible stomp box? And more importantly, why did its unique purchasing model cause such an immediate and frankly visceral controversy in the musician community?
The core idea, I think, is that the PX1 is a brilliantly innovative hardware platform. It's designed to capture the essence of the entire historic BSS effects lineup, all those sounds, and put them in one box.
Well, you have to understand the name to get the product right.
You do. The term plug out is key.
And some Roland and Boss fans might recognize that from their synths. So what does it mean here?
Okay, so the PX1 is fundamentally a digital plug-out model loader platform. The whole concept started with Roland's System 1 synthesizers.
Right.
And it refers to this idea where the hardware hosts these meticulously modeled software algorithms.
So it's not just an emulator, it's running the real deal digitally.
Precisely. It runs these authentic BSS effect algorithms, but only one at a time. It's a perfect bridge between the hardware and software worlds.
And they've housed all of this cutting-edge stuff inside that iconic BOSS compact pedal. The familiar size, about 73 by 125 millimeters, 400 grams.
It just slots right onto your board. No aesthetic compromises.
But what's fascinating is the effort they claim to have put into the modeling itself.
Yeah, we're not talking about, generic digital emulations. They're saying these are newly developed algorithms, and they're using a powerful, dedicated DSP engine.
And dedicating that whole engine to just one effect at a time. Why is that so important?
It's all about authenticity. By dedicating all of that processing power, and we're likely talking high-res, like 32-bit floating point, it lets them model every little detail, the component interactions, the nonlinear response, even how the power supply sags, all the stuff that gives the original its feel.
And the initial reviews have been pretty positive, right? People are saying it's remarkably close to the old analog box.
They're glowing, yeah. The consensus seems to be that the tone and, crucially, the feel are there.
And that promise of genuine tone is critical, especially when you look at what they give you right out of the box. It ships with 16 effects in total.
Which is a very generous starting point. 8 of those are permanently pre-installed. You can't get rid of them.
The foundations, basically. The OD1 overdrive, the SD1.
Your DS1 distortion, the PH1 phaser, all the classics. But it's the inclusion of some of the rarer pedals in that permanent library that really makes it interesting.
Right. You mean like the SP1 Spectrum and the one everyone talks about, the SG1 Slow Gear?
Exactly. The SG1 Slow Gear is legendary. It was one of the first pedals to even try and do those violin-like volume swells.
And they were discontinued so quickly, so originals are crazy expensive now.
Astonishing prices. So getting that sound just baked into the pedal from the start is massive.
Okay, so that's 8 permanent effects. Then you've got the other 8.
Right, the second batch. These are the ones you can load into the pedal's user memories with the free VOSS Effect Loader app.
And what's in that batch?
More essentials, really. The CE2 chorus, the DD2 digital delay, the VB2 vibrato. So right from the jump, for what, $250? You're getting access to vintage tones that would cost you thousands to collect.
Which brings us to the hardware itself.
Yeah.
How did they manage to squeeze all that new tech into the classic case?
They were pretty smart about the interface. You still have the 3-knob layout.
But they're not the same old knobs.
No, they're clickable blue knob encoders, so their function changes depending on the effect you've loaded. And below them, you've got this wide LCD screen.
Which you need for navigating a digital pedal.
Absolutely. It shows you parameter names, values, all your menu settings. It's minimal, but it tells you everything you need to know.
But the connectivity, that's where it really leaves its analog ancestors behind.
Oh, completely. We're talking modern high-end I/O. The stereo input and output is huge.
For stereo rigs, ping pong delays, that sort of thing.
Or studio work. It's just vital. And then you have a TRS MIDI input for MIDI clock sync.
Why is MIDI sync so crucial for a stomp box like this?
Well, if you're playing with, say, sequenced drums or backing tracks, you need your time-based effects to lock in perfectly.
Your delays, your flanders.
Right. MIDI clock lets the PX1 integrate into a Pro setup in a way the original analog pedals never could. It just makes those effects so much more usable.
I think the most compelling modern feature, though, is the expanded control you get from that single CTL1 EXP jack.
Oh, yeah. That adds a ton of practical utility. You can plug in external foot switches like an FS6 or FS7.
For tap tempo and for what they're calling the swap function.
The swap function, yeah. Which basically turns the PX1 into 2 pedals at once, right?
That's the idea.
You use an external switch, and you can instantly toggle between 2 effects you've pre-selected, side A and side B.
So you could have, like, an OD1 and a DS1 ready to go.
Exactly. For a gigging musician with limited pedal board space, that's incredibly useful.
And the expression pedal integration. The old analog boxes couldn't do that.
No, and it adds a significant amount of, expression. You can assign almost any parameter to the pedal.
Like the rate of a vibrato or the gain of an overdrive.
Or the sweep of a phaser. It transforms a static sound into a dynamic performance tool. You're getting functionality you'd normally only see on a big multi-effects unit, but with that authentic BOSS tone.
All of which is impressive, but it leads us right to the business model. And this is where BioSS accidentally stepped on a pretty big landmine.
This is the absolute crux of the controversy. The hardware is brilliant, but the way you get future effects, that caused a massive reaction.
Okay, so lay it out. How does it work?
Starting in January 2026, any new effect models will be available through what they call a model pass. You buy it in the BioSS app for $9.99.
And that sub-$10 price point immediately set off alarm bells. People started yelling microtransactions.
And that was amplified by the the horse armor analogy that went
A
viral.
reference to that infamous piece of DLC from the gaming world?
Right. The criticism was that you're being asked to pay extra for digital content on a piece of hardware you already own. It felt like software licensing creeping into a world that's always been about one-time purchases.
It's interesting how visceral the reaction from the guitar community was. But is that horse armor analogy really fair?
That's the critical discussion that kind of got lost in the outrage.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the VST plugin market or even expansion packs for big modeling amps,
It's pretty standard.
it's totally standard. Paying $10 for a highly detailed official model of an iconic effect is a bargain, really. You're paying for the R&D.
The argument being you're getting a simulation of a $400 vintage pedal for the price of a coffee and a pastry.
Exactly. So you have these two competing views. Is it the future of affordable access to rare tones, or is it the start of some insidious digital commercialization?
And BIOS had to pivot pretty fast to address that outrage.
They did. Their defense focused on three key clarifications. First, these are absolutely not subscriptions.
They're one-time purchases, a lifetime license.
Correct. The Model Pass is tied to your Roland account. Once you buy it and load it on the pedal, it works forever. You don't need the app or an internet connection.
It's ownership, not rental.
Right. Second, they stress that these aren't just, firmware updates. They're entirely new, complex, optional effect models.
And finally, they just reiterated the core value. The initial 16 effects are always yours. You paid for the hardware and those first 16 models up front.
They're trying to draw a clear line between essential functionality and optional expansion, but there is one key trade-off that keeps the skepticism alive.
And that's the storage limit.
The storage limit, yeah. This is not a multi-FX unit that can hold hundreds of models. The PX1 only stores 16 effects at any time, 8 fixed and 8 user slots.
So if you get really into it and buy, say, 20 of these model passes,
Your purchase collection is going to quickly exceed those 8 user slots, which means you have to go back to the app to swap effects in and out.
so you become more reliant on that digital ecosystem to manage the library you paid for.
It's the trade-off. They prioritized pristine tone for one effect over massive internal storage. It's a very deliberate design choice.
Okay, let's pivot a bit and talk about who this pedal is actually for. What are the undeniable benefits here?
For a tone purist who still needs flexibility, the benefits are huge. The main one is access to those rare, discontinued, and frankly, astronomically expensive vintage pedals.
Like the slow gear we mentioned, which can sell for over $400 used.
And the whole PX1 is $250. It just democratizes access to these sounds that were locked behind collector prices.
And it's a huge cost and space saving for your pedal board.
Absolutely. Plus, you get low noise, you get digital reliability, a silent buffered bypass.
Yeah.
These are things that are objectively better than some of those old temperamental analog units.
You get the vintage tone without the vintage headache.
Yeah, it's a perfect way to put it.
But how does it stack up against its direct competitors? At $250, it's not quite in the premium multi-FX territory, but it's up against other single-effect modelers.
If you look at something like, say, the Line 6 HX1, which is also designed to run one effect at a time,
Right.
that unit costs about $100 more, but it stores hundreds of presets and models internally. The PX1 is very clearly targeting the player who is already deep in the BSS ecosystem.
Someone who specifically wants the authentic BSS algorithms.
Exactly. Its value rests entirely on that history and the quality of those specific recreations.
And that brings us back to that crucial limitation. The PX1 only runs one effect at a time.
And it is explicitly not a broad multi-FX device. It's not going to replace your whole rig if your style relies on stacking, say, a chorus into an overdrive into a delay all in one box.
It's a highly specialized, swappable, single-pedal workstation.
That's it. So if you look at it from a macro perspective, it's like a digital archive, a palette that preserves decades of that compact pedal heritage.
It really does seem to bridge that gap between collectors, tone chasers, and actual gigging players who need those sounds, but with modern control.
It takes all the nostalgia and the rarity and makes it practical and usable in, 2025. It's a remarkable piece of engineering.
It is absolutely fascinating. They've packaged these meticulously modeled classics into that familiar footprint, but with all the modern digital control you could want.
In short, the PX1 is like a digital jukebox packed with classics. It offers instant high-quality tone, But its long-term success really hinges on whether players accept that digital ecosystem.
And whether they view the Model Pass as affordable access or as, the commercialization of digital scarcity?
That's the million-dollar question.
Which raises an even bigger question, one that pushes beyond just the tech and into the philosophy of collecting gear. If the PX1 offers these incredibly high-quality digital versions of rare pedals, like the SG1 Slow Gear, what does this platform mean for the future market of the physical, original vintage pedals?
It's a huge question. If you can get 99% of the sound for $10, does that $400 vintage unit, does it keep its allure just because of what it's made of? Or does this platform ultimately deflate the vintage market for these specific, highly modeled classics?
Something for you to mull over. Thanks for diving deep with us on the BOSS PX1.
If you're a musician today, you face a dilemma. How do you get that genuinely flagship-level guitar tone, that tube amp feel, the huge palette of effects, without needing a manual the size of a phone book?
Right.
Modern gear has incredible potential, but complexity is often, the price you pay for flexibility.
It's a constant tension in the world of amp modeling, isn't it? You want digital depth, but you need analog speed.
Yeah.
And that is precisely why we're jumping into the Baauertest GX series amp and effects processors today.
Yeah.
We're really looking at how Baauertest engineered the GX100 and its newer super compact sibling, the GX10.
We've got a massive stack of sources here, and they all seem to agree this GX line is operating in what they call the modern middleweight category. It's not the massive top-of-the-line flagship like the GT1000, but it's way beyond just a simple two-button pedal.
Our mission today is pretty clear then. We need to dissect how Baauertest successfully merged their, undisputed flagship tone lineage, which is derived directly from the GT1000's deep Erard modeling, with a really intuitive, fast, modern workflow that is centered entirely around a high-res color touchscreen. This isn't just a technical deep dive. It's an analysis of how they solved a core user experience problem.
So what's the takeaway for you, the listener? By the end of this deep dive, you'll not only get the core engine that drives the tone, but you'll also know the crucial feature trade-offs between the Pioneer, the larger GX100 from 2022, and the super portable GX10 released in 2024.
And you'll see why this platform is actually seen as historically significant.
Exactly. So let's start with its place in the market.
The GX line is just a masterclass in defining a niche. It avoids the budget compromises you'd see in entry-level units, but it doesn't carry the physical size or, the cost of the full flagships.
It's a middleweight that packs a serious punch.
Totally. It delivers high-end features and connectivity in a format that's really designed for the modern gigging musician or home studio user.
That distinction, the modern middleweight, is so important. It tells you immediately the core promise isn't just about a few built-in effects.
No.
It's about providing that sweet spot of high-end modeling with a high degree of portability and setup flexibility.
And critically, the promise is predicated on quality and speed. You are getting that GP1000-derived air amp feel, coupled with what are, genuinely flagship quality effects.
Which is a deliberate contrast to the legacy of older processors.
Oh, absolutely. The old traditional menu-driven things where trying to edit a patch just felt tedious and slow. The GX line's focus on instantaneous speed, thanks to that big color touchscreen, that's its defining feature.
Okay, so let's quickly catalog the two models then. The GX100, the original from 2022.
Yep.
Its core identity was all about maximum onboard control and integration. It's a floorboard first.
And the newer GX10, launched in late 2024, is explicitly described in the sources as taking that exact GX100 engine and color touch display and just putting it in the smallest practical footprint possible.
So its identity is maximum portability.
Optimized for smaller setups without sacrificing the actual processing power.
Okay. This brings us to the engine room. If they're touting flagship tone, we need to talk tech. What is Baauertest relying on to provide this amp feel, and how is it different from older digital modeling?
The sound foundation is built around a really successful marriage between two core concepts. First, you have their long-standing tube logic approach. It focuses on meticulously modeling the physical behavior of a tube circuit, component by component. This just ensures the foundational tone is realistic.
But historically, that's where digital has sometimes fallen a bit short. A detailed model can still feel sterile, kind of lacking the dynamism of real tubes. How does Boss S make sure a player coming from a tube amp won't feel that spongy digital disconnect when they play the GX?
That disconnect is exactly what aired-augmented impulse response dynamics is engineered to solve.
Okay.
Aired is more than just impulse responses. It models the entire interactive ecosystem of the amplifier. It ensures that when you dig in with your pick, the model reacts exactly like a real physical tube amp breaking up.
So it's responding to your playing nuance volume knob adjustments.
All of it. Pickup choices, everything. That crucial response under the fingers is what separates a good modeler from a truly great one.
That makes the modeling dynamic, not static. And just as critical as the dynamics is how that tone integrates into your rig. If you have a realistic digital tone, how do you stop it from sounding bad when it hits a real amplifier?
That's where the AirRD output select options become absolutely crucial. You might have the best digital amp model in the world, but if you send it straight into the front of a traditional amp, say a Fender Deluxe, the second preamp stage of that physical amp just colors your model tone completely wrong.
Right, it's like running an amp into an amp.
Exactly. So AirRD gives you specific dedicated profile filters for plugging into an amp's front end, for sending to an amp's effects return, for a full-range flat response system, and FR.
Which is basically a hi-fi speaker that doesn't color the sound.
Precisely. Or for sending it directly to the front-of-house mixing console. This ensures the tone translates correctly, instantly, no matter where it's going.
That level of destination customization is just non-negotiable for a gigging musician.
Yeah.
And speaking of flexibility, the internal routing capabilities here are incredible. Our sources highlight that both models allow for up to 15 simultaneous effect blocks in a single patch.
That is a huge amount of DSP overhead. It really is.
So you could run a drive, a noise suppressor, a delay, a reverb, a flanger.
And still have enough blocks left over to run two separate amp blocks at the same time.
So you can do a full dual amp setup.
Absolutely. If you want to run a dual amp setup, maybe blend a sparkling clean American style with a heavily saturated British stack, you can do that within one patch, using both series and parallel routing.
And naturally, to nail the sound, you need cabinet simulation for those modeled amps.
Of course. Both models feature a comprehensive selection of built-in speaker cabs, but for those who are really chasing specific studio tones, critically, they also allow for user IR loading.
So you can load your own.
You can load your own high-quality WAV impulse responses via USB using the Tone Studio software. You can customize your cabinet sound completely beyond the stock options.
Boy, that covers the core engine. Now we have to address the key difference that sets the GX line apart historically within the BOFS ecosystem, the workflow revolution driven by the color touch display.
This is the operational game changer. Think back to the previous generation of BIOS multi-effects, the Co-SM era stuff.
Oh, yeah.
If you wanted to make a simple change like moving an EQ from post-reverb to pre-delay, it often felt like diving through 6 layers of menus, using tiny buttons just to change one parameter. It was slow and frustrating.
And totally impractical to do live. That physical act of menu diving became the real bottleneck. The power was there, but the speed wasn't.
Exactly. The color touchscreen fundamentally changes the physics of editing. It allows for immediate drag-and-drop signal chain manipulation.
You're not scrolling through text. You're looking at a visual representation of your actual signal chain.
Yep. If you want to move your favorite vintage delay from post-amp to preamp, you literally just drag it on the screen.
That ability to see and manipulate complex routing visually is huge. It connects back to the historical significance we mentioned. This isn't just a convenience feature, is it?
No, it's an operational breakthrough. The sources emphasize that the GX platform is where BIOS successfully made deep, professional-level routing, like that 15-block chain we talked about, feel fast and practical.
Even when you're live on a gig.
Even then. Especially then, it made complexity truly accessible by just removing that menu wall.
All right, let's focus now on the GX100. The Pioneer launched back in March 2022. This model was built for the musician who values maximum control right on the floor.
Yes. The GX100 is designed to be a comprehensive floorboard replacement. It gives you immense control right out of the box, featuring 8 dedicated foot switches, plus a built-in expression pedal that also has a toe switch.
So you can easily switch between changing patches and using it like individual pedals?
Yeah, you switch between memory mode for patch changes and a dedicated manual mode that lets those 8 switches function just like individual stomp boxes.
And its connectivity is geared towards high-end pro integration, right? It plays well with other gear.
Crucially, the GX100 includes a dedicated send-return loop. This is vital for 2 reasons. First, integrating your external analog pedals. Maybe you have a favorite vintage fuzz you can't live without.
Okay.
Second, and more technically demanding, it lets you use the four-cable method, or 4CM, set up with an external amplifier.
We should probably quickly define 4CM for our listeners since it's such a key pro feature.
Of course. The four-cable method is a way to use your multi-effects to handle all your tone shaping before the amplifier's preamp-like drives and compressors,
Right.
and all your time-based effects in the amplifier's effects loop, like delays and reverbs.
So you get a best of both worlds.
Totally. Your amp's cherished preamp tone, mixed seamlessly with the GX100's sophisticated effects, all managed within one unit. That send-return loop is the key component that makes it possible.
Well, and it's great to see that BSS has continued to nurture this platform. The GX100 got that massive version 2.0 firmware update.
It did. It significantly expanded its tone palette, adding new air-art amps for both guitar and bass, plus brand new effect types and general workflow improvements. It's an evolving piece of gear, not a static product.
That commitment shows the platform is robust. Now, let's shift to the newer, highly portable unit, the GX10, released in late 2024.
The sources are crystal clear on this. The GX10 uses the exact core sound engine and the essential color touch display from the GX100. They did not compromise on the brain.
They only miniaturized the body.
This is the compact contender. It's designed for maximum portability, think flying with a smaller rig or fitting into a crowded rehearsal space. The physical control layout is what immediately differs. The GX10 has only 3 foot switches, but still manages to integrate an expression pedal with a toe switch.
So despite the reduced size and control, it retains that massive capability we outlined earlier. Dual amps, 15 blocks, full editing via touch.
Completely. It maintains the full depth of the tone engine and the drag-and-drop editing. What's even more compelling are the updated headline numbers for the GX10, which reflect the expanded library from that GX100 firmware update.
So it launched with more stuff.
Yeah, it launched with 32 amplifier types, specifically 23 guitar amps plus 9 bass amps and over 170 effects.
That growth in the library shows the GX10 is launching with a deeper set of features than the GX100 did initially. That's great for the consumer.
And its connectivity has been refined for the portable user. It now features USB-C audio connectivity,
which makes it easier to interface with modern computers and mobile devices for recording or reamping.
a huge simplification for the modern recording musician.
Plus, the ability to control it wirelessly seems tailor-made for portability.
It is. It supports the optional Bluetooth audio MIDI dual adapter. This lets you edit patches remotely with a smartphone app, adjusting parameters without leaning over the unit.
And it facilitates audio streaming, which is great for silent practice.
Or just jamming along with backing tracks. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So we've laid out the features of both. Now for the crucial comparison, the one that helps the listener decide. If both models share the core ARD engine, the dual amp capability, the 15 effects blocks, and that essential touchscreen workflow, what is the functional difference that dictates which unit you should choose?
It truly just synthesizes into a choice between control quantity and physical footprint.
Okay.
If you are a player who prioritizes maximum onboard foot control for immediate live use, meaning you want 8 dedicated switches without relying on external hardware, the GX100 is your choice. It's the ready-to-go, self-contained floorboard.
In other words, the GX100 is for the player who wants to keep everything mapped to a dedicated switch for quick access and performance.
Exactly. Conversely, you should choose the GX10 if your primary concern is maximum portability while retaining that high-end GX engine and fast touchscreen workflow.
Right.
It's aimed squarely at the high-end compact category, the HX Stomp class size. The trade-off is fewer onboard switches. But if you decide you need more foot control later, BOSS supports adding external controllers.
So you can add up to 2 foot switches or an extra expression pedal.
You can. It's expandable.
It seems like the GX10 is really the compact distillation of the GX100 concept. They are the same family, defined by that successful integration of flagship AR tone, massive processing, IR loading, and the intuitive high-speed touchscreen. The only real choice is whether you prefer quantity of control or maximum shrinkage.
That's the key takeaway. The GX line represents the successful move by BOSS to combine flagship tone technology, that aired realism, with a highly practical, fast, touch-enabled workflow, fundamentally making complex signal chains accessible and immediate.
Which was previously a serious challenge in the digital modeling world.
A huge challenge.
And since the core tone engine and the massive 15-block processing capability are now successfully integrated across both the large GX100 floorboard and the highly compact GX10, this raises a powerful question for you, the learner. Now that the middleweight category has been redefined by the speed and practicality of the touch interface, how quickly will we see this level of processing power and touchscreen capability fully miniaturized into standard single stomp box sizes in the coming years?
It's clear the technological trade-off is no longer primarily about sound quality or block count, but rather about physical control and screen real estate. The future is small, fast, and powerful.
A fascinating trajectory for modeling gear and workflow. That was the deep dive into the Bot SGX series. We encourage you to explore the capabilities of this modern middleweight platform further. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're putting on our critical listening ears. We're tracing the lineage of one of the most ambitious and longest running lines in digital guitar processing.
We are talking about the Bias SGT series.
Exactly. And this isn't just a gear review. I mean, this is really an exploration of a technological arc that spans, over 2 decades?
Oh, easily.
Yeah.
And it's a story that really mirrors the entire history of amp modeling itself. We're talking about the journey from these early kind of constrained digital sounds to the fluid realism we have today.
Yeah, and the GT series, it's always been Bias's high-end laboratory, hasn't it?
It absolutely has.
Right.
And, the sources we've compiled for this really make one thing perfectly clear. While other companies might have focused on convenience, the mission of the GT line was always and still is about one thing: maximum capability.
Okay, let's unpack that word capability right away. Because when people think of Bias multi-effects, a lot of them probably think of the ME line, which is simpler, more user-friendly. But the GT series, it's on a whole different philosophical plane. What defines that flagship status?
It all comes down to the architecture and the sheer depth of the signal chain. You see, the ME line is built for speed, plug in, find a sound, and play.
Right, quick and easy.
Exactly. The GT line, on the other hand, is designed to either replace or integrate with an entire complex studio rack or a massive pedal board. It gives you the power to run, say, multiple amp and cabinet models at the same time, route signals in parallel.
Or in series, pretty much any way you can imagine.
Any way you want. And it provides all the complex inputs and outputs you need for professional mixing or stage monitoring. It's really about system building, not just finding a tone.
And as we track this long history, the sources highlight 2 massive technological phases that really divide the story of the GT series. These 2 phases are, they're the key to understanding how all of this evolved.
Precisely. First, you have the foundational era. This spans almost 20 years, and it was defined entirely by one technology: COSM.
Composite Object Sound Modeling.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And COSM was all about breaking down and digitally modeling the individual physical components of the sound: the tubes, the speakers, the cabinet materials. It was modeling what the amp was built from.
And then we hit the modern era, the big reset.
Yeah, around 2018.
Yeah.
And that's defined by AirArt.
Augmented impulse response dynamics.
Right. And this was a total paradigm shift. Bias has moved away from just modeling the components to modeling the feel, and crucially, the interaction of the entire amplifier ecosystem.
So it's modeling how the amp behaves, not just what's inside it.
Exactly. And that transition is what makes this deep dive so compelling. We're going to trace that whole progression, starting with the GT3, which, basically put a rack processor on the floor.
All the way up to the modular dynamic system we see in the latest GT1000 series.
It's quite a journey.
To really understand where we are now, I think you have to appreciate the huge leap that BIS took back in the late 90s. So let's jump back to 1998, the launch of the GT3. This machine, it was basically a declaration of war against the big, expensive, rack-mounted processors that dominated the pro scene back then.
It really was. The GT3 was the end of Bar SS just sort of dipping their toes into multi-effects. This was the beginning of their flagship era. Its significance is all in the architecture. It established that whole GT philosophy.
Deep editing, total control.
And an architecture borrowed heavily from that professional rack gear, just, crammed into a stage-ready floor unit. Before this, floor units were often just an add-on to a rig.
The GT3 wanted to be the whole rig.
It aimed to be a centerpiece, yeah.
And that centerpiece ran on the first generation of COSM amp modeling. In 1998, digital modeling it was the Wild West. So Looking back, what did early generation COSM actually mean for the player?
For the user, it was a massive leap in versatility. It meant having digital versions of iconic amplifiers for the first time in a Bias floor unit. It had flexible routing, stereo I/O, MIDI for external control.
And all the essential effects blocks: overdrive, distortion, modulation, delay, reverb.
And, one constant through the entire GT line, even back then, was Boas's strength in time-based effects. The sources all confirm that even on that first GT3, the modulation and delay quality was already professional grade. A real strength.
But the amp modeling itself, it definitely had the limitations of 1998 tech. The sources often described the clean tones as solid, but you could hear that it was digital.
A little sterile, maybe.
And the distortion models were aggressive, but often described as grainy by modern standards. We should probably explain why that graininess existed.
Yeah, that's a key point. That graininess wasn't a flaw in the design, not really. It was a necessary technological compromise. It was all dictated by the DSP, the digital signal processing power they had at the time.
So not enough horsepower?
Not nearly enough. I mean, think about it. To simulate the incredibly complex, nonlinear harmonic distortion of a real tube amp requires enormous computational power. The processors in the late 90s just couldn't handle that full complexity.
So they had to cut corners, so to speak.
They had to. Engineers often had to use things like deep compression and simplification of the harmonic structure just to fit the sound modeling into the available DSP budget.
So if you were trying to model, say, a cranked Marshall head, you got the basic frequency shape and the gain structure.
But you sacrificed all the subtle stuff. The
Yeah.
dynamic response, the complex way harmonics decay, all the things that make a real tube amp feel alive.
Right. It was a trade-off then. Immense versatility and control in one box.
But with that slight tonal compromise, that noticeable fizz or graininess, especially on the high gain sounds. The GT3 was the foundation for sure, but it showed the journey toward realism was really just beginning.
Speaking of that journey, let's jump ahead 3 years, 2001, the launch of the GT6. Now, this wasn't just a small update. The sources marked this as a huge technological leap, using something they called improved KSM.
And this is the unit that really propelled the GT line into being a genuine touring staple.
So what specific improvements did it have that addressed the GT3's limitations?
The main focus was on realism in the modeling. They saw a really dramatic improvement in the amp response, and that was purely down to more powerful DSP.
So less of that graininess.
A lot less. The distortion models were less compressed, less fizzy. But architecturally, the biggest leap was the introduction of more QSM amp models, and crucially, dual signal chains with parallel routing.
Okay, that is a massive architectural jump for a floor unit. If you're a touring guitarist listening to this, why do dual signal chains completely change the game?
It brings studio-level complexity to the stage. In the GT3, you're pretty much running a single linear signal chain, one effect after another.
Right.
With the GT6's dual chains, you could, for example, run a distortion block in parallel with a completely clean signal and then mix them back together. Or, more commonly, you could split your signal after the amp model and run two completely different post-amp effects paths.
Like one path with a chorus and delay, and another with a volume swell, and then blend them.
Exactly. It just dramatically increased the sonic palette and the complexity you could create. It really solidified that capability identity we talked about.
And they also enhanced the speaker simulation here, which is, that's half the battle when you're trying to replicate a mic'd cabinet sound.
Yes. And that just shows the more holistic approach they were starting to take.
Yeah.
They realized that modeling the amp head perfectly wasn't enough if the speaker sim was still basic. The GT6 improved both.
And the result?
Well, the resulting tone was still sometimes described as somewhat compressed and processed. It was still an artifact of early 2000s digital modeling. But its reliability and flexibility.
Yeah.
It became indispensable on the road. It really earned its title as a touring standard.
So if the GT6 introduced dual chains, the GT8 in 2004 took that concept and just completely weaponized it. This unit, running on advanced KSM, is the one the sources always call the performance powerhouse.
That's the one.
What specific performance limitation was the GT8 designed to just crush?
It was designed to crush the inability to layer complex amp tones seamlessly. You see, the GT6 had dual signal paths, but the GT8 introduced the ability to run dual QSM amps simultaneously.
Ah, okay. That's a much more demanding task computationally.
Oh, massively. Imagine being able to run a simulated Fender Twin right alongside a high-gain Mesa simulation, assign their levels to an expression pedal, and then blend between them in real time.
So the difference is the GT6 let you run effects in parallel, but the GT8 let you run two completely independent processor-intensive amp simulations at the same time.
Exactly. And that demanded a serious boost in the internal architecture. That includes improved AD and DA conversion.
And that's a technical point, but it's really critical for the listener, right? Better conversion means a cleaner signal.
It's vital. Better A to D conversion means the raw signal from your guitar is captured more accurately with less noise before any processing even starts. And better D to A conversion on the output means the final sound going to your speakers is cleaner, reducing that sort of digital haze or harshness you'd hear in older units.
And the result of all that was that the amp models became noticeably more dynamic. The crucial touch response improved.
Yes, guitarists started feeling a much more direct relationship between how hard they were picking and the tone they were getting. That's a real hallmark of a great tube amp.
So that improved feel, combined with this massive expansion in control, a global EQ, assignable foot switches, deep control assigns for almost every parameter.
It made the GT8 just legendary for its roadworthiness. I mean, you couldn't walk into a major rock venue in the mid-2000s without seeing a few of these lined up backstage. It was the ultimate balance of fidelity, control, and just bulletproof reliability for any touring pro.
Okay, so after the GT8 pretty much perfected performance control, the question then became, how much further can we possibly push the complexity?
And the answer arrived in 2008, the GT10.
Which many people still refer to as the SciSM supercomputer. This thing ran on next-gen COSM plus advanced DSP. What was the priority here for BAW-SS?
With the GT10, it was all about maximizing the roading depth. They maintained the dual amp modeling from the GT8, but they just pushed the flexibility to the absolute extreme.
What was the goal?
The goal was to give the user the ability to design patches of, frankly, mind-boggling complexity. You could have maybe 6 effects blocks before the amp, and then another 4 blocks split and running in parallel after the amp, and have each one controlled by a different expression pedal function.
That sounds intense. It must have required a serious user interface overhaul to even manage that kind of power.
It absolutely did. The depth was enormous, which is why they introduced the first color LCD screen on a GT unit just to make navigation a little more manageable. They implemented the deepest assign system they'd ever made.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. You can map the expression pedal sweep to simultaneously decrease the gain on amp A, while at the same time increasing the mix on a delay in path B. You could create these incredibly complex dynamic sound morphs with just one single foot movement.
That kind of intricacy was
Yeah,
revolutionary at the
It
time.
really was.
But this maximum capability, it came with a trade-off, didn't it? A big one we hear reflected in all the community feedback from that time.
A very steep learning curve.
Yeah.
Yes. The GT10 was deep, powerful, and incredibly complex. That's why it's remembered as the last COSM supercomputer. While the tonal results could be absolutely outstanding, the effects quality was extremely high. It required real dedication. You had to set aside a weekend, just to really learn how to program it.
It became the benchmark for what could be done with COSM, but maybe not what the average user wanted to do right out of the box.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So after pushing COSM to its absolute limit of complexity, the next logical move had to be refinement. And that brings us to 2012 and the GT100. The sources call this the transition unit.
Running the final evolution of COSM.
Right. What was the thinking here?
The GT100 was a necessary pivot. Well, I think BSS realized that the intimidation factor of the GT10 was starting to limit its audience. So the GT100 focused relentlessly on two things: sound quality and usability.
So it still had the power.
Oh yeah, it retained the dual signal paths and the excellent effects, but the user interface was simplified. And the presets were significantly better right out of the box. You didn't need to be a coding genius to get a great sound almost instantly.
And tonally, this is where the COSM architecture really matured, isn't it? The GT100 is known for having smoother amp tones, better dynamics, and critically, a less harsh top end.
That suggests they were finally overcoming those early digital artifacts without having to completely abandon the COSM architecture they'd spent so long developing.
How'd they do it?
They just optimized the algorithms to squeeze out the maximum amount of dynamics. The sound was much less polished or processed sounding and a lot closer to that raw tube experience than any previous generation.
And the effects were top-notch.
The sources noted that the effects quality on the GT100 was virtually indistinguishable from pedals. This unit was really the final evolutionary stage of COSM. They had squeezed every last drop of performance and realism out of that fundamental technology. It set the stage for the radical change that they knew was necessary to move forward.
But before that radical change, BSS did something really smart. They took the opportunity to democratize this perfected COSM sound.
Yes, in 2017, we get the GT1.
Which wasn't a flagship unit, but it was hugely significant.
Absolutely. The GT1 took that simplified GT100 engine and shrunk it down into a compact, affordable, portable little box. Its philosophy was purely about access.
So for the listener who's, running a home studio or needs a powerful but lightweight backup rig for travel,
The GT1 was perfect. It put GT-level processing, the result of nearly 20 years of COSM refinement, into this tiny, lightweight chassis.
Now, it did sacrifice some things, the heavy-duty inputs and outputs, and some of the sheer headroom of the flagship GT100.
Of course.
But its value proposition for the modern audience, especially the bedroom player, was massive.
It really was. That less headroom that you see mentioned in reviews, it simply means that it didn't have the same level of dedicated DSP to maximize the dynamic range needed for, massive stage volumes.
But for the home guitarist, for practice, for direct recording,
It was ideal. It delivered high-quality, controllable tones at low volumes, which is a common problem for players who can't crank a real amp. The GT1 really achieved that goal of making the mature COSM architecture widely accessible, right before Bias performed its complete architectural overhaul.
And with the GT1, we close the book on the COSM story. A long, successful march of continuous refinement, all based on modeling the components of the sound.
And now we enter a completely new era. We move from composite object sound modeling to augmented impulse response dynamics.
The aired revolution.
Exactly.
So the transition to the GT1000 in 2018, this represents a seismic shift in Boss philosophy. This was not an iteration of COSM. It was, as the sources clearly state, a total reset.
A total reset.
Why? Why did Boss S feel the need to just abandon 2 decades of successful COSM technology for something brand new?
Well, CSM, for all its success, was hitting a wall, and that wall was primarily in dynamic feel. It was great at modeling the sound of a circuit, but modern modelers, for the companies like Helix and Fractal, they were showing that players now demanded the feel.
The interaction.
Yes, the dynamic interaction between the player's fingers, the strings, the simulated tubes, the speakers, all of it. Era was engineered specifically to bridge that gap.
So we shift from modeling what an amp contains to modeling how the whole amp system interacts. Tell us more about AIR, Augmented Impulse Response Dynamics. What does that augmented part actually mean in practice?
Arity is all about simulating the nonlinear interconnected nature of a true tube amp. Think about a real amplifier. When you hit a power chord really hard, the power supply sags for a moment, the output transformer reacts to the speaker load, the entire system behaves dynamically.
And older CSM struggled to capture that in real time.
It really did. Arity uses high-resolution processing to simulate all of these phenomena holistically as a complete system.
So if your SM gave us a perfectly recorded, maybe slightly compressed picture of an amp, AIR is the live video feed, including the environment, the subtle noise, and that responsive flutter that happens between the notes.
That is a perfect way to put it. The goal was, and I'm quoting here, true amp-like interaction with power amps. This gives the GT1000 a feel under the pick that the earlier COSM units, just due to their DSP limitations, simply couldn't achieve.
You feel the amp responding to your picking attack. Your volume knob changes.
As up in a much more fluid analog manner, yes.
A huge part of any modern modeler is cabinet simulation. The GT1000 also introduced a major innovation here, incorporating IR-like cabinet behavior that was, crucially, dynamic rather than static. This seems like a direct challenge to the popular impulse response technology.
It is a profound technological jump. You see, impulse responses, or IRs, are excellent. They're highly accurate snapshots of a speaker cabinet at a specific moment in time, with a specific mic at a specific volume. But they are fundamentally static. They don't change.
Right.
But a real speaker cabinet is a dynamic electromechanical system. Its impedance changes with frequency, it vibrates, its response changes depending on how hard the power amp is pushing it.
So if you load a static IR, it sounds the same whether you're playing quietly or absolutely diming the simulated power amp.
Exactly. Arity's dynamic cabinet modeling ensures that the simulated cab interaction changes realistically based on the energy coming out of the simulated power amp. It moves, it breathes, it resonates like a real physical cabinet. It adds this crucial layer of authenticity that banishes that static quality of traditional cab simulation.
And beyond the core modeling engine, the GT1000's architecture was designed for the modern studio and stage. Studio-grade effects, extensive routing. But they also added Bluetooth. That seems like a direct response to those complexity critiques of the old GT10.
Oh, it's a massive user experience improvement. The GT10 was so complex to edit on the unit itself. The GT1000 is still a very deep machine, but adding Bluetooth allows for easy, intuitive wireless editing through an app on your phone or tablet.
It makes that immense power much less intimidating, a key lesson learned from the COSM era.
For sure.
And the resulting tonal profile was a massive validation of this whole arid philosophy. The reviews consistently mention a significant reduction in that digital compression. The cleans and edge of breakup tones, which were often the weakest point of early digital modeling, suddenly became excellent.
And the high gain was modern and controlled. The signal didn't just choke when you pushed it hard. It sagged, it fluttered, it responded like a real tube circuit. It finally achieved that amp-like feel that players had been chasing for 20 years.
So the GT1000 successfully put BAW-SS right back into that top-tier modeler conversation, competing head-to-head with anyone on dynamic capability.
Absolutely.
And then just 2 years later, in 2020, BAW-SS did something that truly defined the future of the Arid platform. They released the GT1000 core, and this wasn't a stripped-down version. This was the entire flagship engine condensed into a compact, pedalboard-friendly box.
This unit represents that modular ecosystem concept fully realized. The full GT1000 floor unit is ideal for the player who wants everything in one box. The core is for the player who wants to integrate the sheer power of Arid into their existing hybrid rig.
So it's not trying to replace your whole rig, it's positioning itself as the brain of your rig. It lets you use your favorite analog pedals or loop switchers or outboard gear right alongside the power of Arid.
Precisely. It contains the identical Arid engine. There is zero compromise in sound quality or dynamic response compared to the full GT1000. Its compact size, with full MIDI, USB, and flexible stereo routing, lets it be a dedicated amp modeler, a high-end effects engine, or the command center of a complex pedal board.
The significance here is huge. It proves that the highest level of BAW-SS processing is no longer tied to a giant floorboard.
It confirmed that Arid is a versatile, scalable, modular ecosystem. That power can exist in multiple formats, catering perfectly to the modern guitarist who loves to blend digital and analog components.
Okay, let's take a final look back at this truly remarkable technological path. We've covered 8 major milestones over 22 years, a continuous evolution from early object modeling to dynamic interaction modeling.
It's a perfect study in how rapidly DSP power increased. It's what allowed engineers to move from the necessary compromises of the late 90s to the fluidity we all enjoy today.
We started back in '98 with the GT3. Early COSM establishing that deep control flagship blueprint.
Then moving quickly to the GT6 in 2001, improves KSM, made it a touring standard by introducing that crucial concept of dual signal chains.
Which was immediately followed by the GT8 in 2004. Advanced KSM, delivering unprecedented performance control by allowing 2 independent simultaneous amp models, a huge test for DSP power.
Then we hit the GT10 in 2008, the peak KSM supercomputer, all about maximum routing depth, even if it challenged the user with its complexity.
A necessary pivot came with the GT100 in 2012. Final CSM focused on usability and smoother tones, essentially perfecting that architecture right before the big change.
And then the little GT1 in 2017 democratized that perfected KSM sound, making the tech portable and affordable for pretty much everyone.
Finally, the revolution. The GT1000 in 2018 brings in Air, focusing on true dynamics and that amp-like feel, battling the lingering ghost of digital compression.
And that culminates, so far, in the GT1000 core in 2020, which modularized that Arid power, enabling that seamless integration into hybrid rigs.
So what's the constant thread through all of this? Despite the huge technological upheaval from KSM to Air, what is the core identity of the GT series that sets it apart?
The core identity has always been its singular focus on capability. The GT series has always demanded that the user be willing to dive deep. It's the platform for the player who requires maximum architectural flexibility.
It's not about achieving one great tone.
No, it's about having the power to manipulate that tone, place it anywhere in the chain, route it anywhere you want, and control it through complex MIDI or assignment systems. It is the definition of a comprehensive system builder.
So while COSM was focused on digitally engineering the sound of the components, and AirD is focused on dynamically augmenting the feel of the interaction.
Both generations serve that same high-level professional master.
Yeah.
The need for touring reliability, deep control, and maximum options in a single-floor unit.
It's the ultimate example of technology constantly chasing that perfect replication of analog-tube interaction, while at the same time offering a level of complexity and versatility that no traditional analog rig could ever hope to achieve.
Absolutely. The GT series has always been about providing all the tools, even if mastering those tools required a bit of effort. A clear focus on capability above convenience.
So I have one last thought for you.
Given the remarkable success of the GT1000 Kawar, in shrinking that flagship aired engine into such a compact modular format, a really fascinating question arises about the future direction of the platform. Boss has spent 2 decades maximizing complexity with something like the GT10, only to pivot toward usability with the GT100. Now that they've achieved this technical parity with the GT1000 and proven modularity with the core, what does the next flagship even look like? Do they return to that instinct of just maximizing capability? Release a huge feature-laden GT2000 packed with even more processing power and physical controls?
Or did they go the other way?
Or do they fully embrace the decentralized modder? Perhaps making the flagship a collection of highly specialized air blocks, a dedicated air-to-air amp modeler, a standalone arid cabinet loader, a specialized effects switcher, allowing players to build a truly custom, piecemeal digital system that blurs the line entirely between high-end digital modeling and traditional pedal boards.
That is the ultimate question. The GT series started by taking the rack and putting it under your foot, and now it's shrinking the core of that power into a single pedal. The evolution is clearly far from over. Whether you're intrigued by the complex power of the COSM supercomputer era, or you're ready to jump into the dynamics of the AR8 revolution, the history of the BOSS GT series provides a dense, fascinating look at the future of guitar processing.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping on the 6-string and exploring a piece of gear that, while it might be less glamorous than a vintage tube amp, has been an absolutely essential workhorse for guitarists for, 3 decades now?
That's right.
We're deep diving not into some boutique fuzz or, hand-wired circuits, but into the digital world of the multi-effects unit that really defined accessibility and performance for the masses.
The legendary Boss SME series.
The legendary Boss SME series.
And we have a really deep, rich stack of sources today tracing the technological and cultural evolution of this iconic family of processors. We're starting way back with the ME5 in the mid-90s,
Right.
and taking it all the way up to the ME80, which was just hugely successful. But this is so much more than just a list of features.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a really detailed look at how Boss S solved this fundamental conflict for the gigging musician. I mean, how do you offer virtually every effect you could possibly need without forcing the player to spend their entire sound check just staring into some tiny, complex digital menu?
Exactly. Our mission today is to trace that arc, to see how the ME series so successfully balanced, sheer digital processing power, which just grew exponentially through the 90s and 2000s.
Right.
With that absolutely crucial, intuitive, stomp box style control that guitarists just demand when they're under the pressure of a live performance. It's really the story of the all-in-one rig being perfected. Maybe not in terms of ultimate fidelity, but in terms of unbeatable usability.
The sources really highlight that this ME family, it was explicitly designed for a very specific type of player, and that's you, the learner, who needs knowledge quickly but thoroughly, and who wants that ready-to-go setup. This is the player who craves the all-in-one rig, the effects, the amp simulation, the control system, all of it, built into one compact, reliable unit.
And they need quick preset recall. They need to be live ready.
They need to be live ready, but, and this is really the key design constraint BSS always honored, they absolutely prefer physical knobs and stomp box interfaces over frustrating menu diving.
Okay, let's unpack this. If you're that musician, you're looking for routing options, expandability maybe, but you don't want to carry a full, heavy rack unit and some sprawling pedal board the size of a coffee table.
No, especially if you play small venues or fly to gigs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the ME series, as we're going to demonstrate, it provided this continuous refinement of the interface, the processing power, and the adaptability required to fit into modern rigs as the technology evolved.
It really did. We're talking about a unit that had to adapt to both tube amps and direct-to-PA setups, all while keeping that physical experience totally familiar.
It's important to put this in context.
It is. I mean, when this series began in the mid-90s, the world of guitar effects was just sharply divided.
Yeah.
You had your compact pedals, which were reliable, but, pretty limited in scope.
One sound per box.
Exactly. Or you had these large, expensive, and often really confusing rack units. They offered immense power, but they were just intimidating to program and operate, especially mid-song.
Right.
The ME series sought to marry the immediacy of the compact pedal with the immense power and programmability of the rack unit, all housed in a rugged floor unit.
Which was a radical proposition for the average working musician at the time.
Completely radical.
So where did this critical journey begin? We have to go back to the mid-1990s, specifically 1995 for the introduction of the progenitor, the ME5. This unit wasn't the pinnacle, obviously, but it established the fundamental blueprint that all the future ME units would follow.
The ME5 was hugely significant because, while Ball SS had previous digital processors, this was one of their earliest multi-effects to consciously incorporate that dedicated pedal-style control system designed for the floor.
The industrial design just screams, stomp on me.
It did. It made it so clear. This wasn't a desktop unit. It was built for stomping. It was aimed squarely at bringing powerful, compact multi-effects right into practice rooms, rehearsal studios, and small stages.
It was about democratizing access to programmable sound.
Exactly.
Let's delve into its architecture, because its simplicity is really what set the foundation and dictated the whole workflow. It was DSP-based.
Right.
And it focused on the 5 core building blocks every guitarist needs. Gain, so your drive, modulation, delay, reverb, and pitch effects.
It wasn't trying to do everything. It was trying to do the essentials really, really reliably.
And this foundational system delivered over 80 preset patches.
Which for 1995, 80 different programmable sounds ready to go? That was a considerable library. I mean, just think about the alternative.
Buying, powering, connecting 80 individual stomp boxes.
Forget it. And the interface was minimal, certainly by today's standards. You had a simple 2-digit or small dot matrix LCD display and single rotary or slider parameters for editing. It was rugged and it was compact, a massive pro for players needing immediate sound recall without all the complexity.
But the crucial architectural point here, and one that really provides context for the entire evolution of the ME line, is what was deliberately missing. Our sources make it crystal clear. The ME5 had no amp modeling or cab simulation.
None.
It was effects only. This meant you were entirely dependent on your existing amplifier, its tone, its characteristics, its speaker, for your fundamental sonic identity.
Exactly. And that decision immediately defined its usage. Its tonal profile centered around immediately usable sounds, even if they lacked the depth or nuance of modern algorithms.
So we're talking foundational combinations.
Yeah. Basic crunch, late overdrive, simple chorus, phaser, flanger, and tremolo. Its primary use was augmenting existing clean or slightly broken up amps. It wasn't a rig replacement.
Right. It excelled in practice setups and simple live rigs for players who prioritized quick, reliable effects over, deep editing.
The ME5 proved the core floor unit concept worked. It established the form factor and the workflow that emphasized performance.
But it immediately hit a ceiling, right? In terms of processing and feature depth. And that market demand pushed Ball SS very quickly to its successor, the ME8, which was released just 2 years later in 1997.
The transition was incredibly swift. I mean, the competition in digital effects was just heating up.
So the ME8 is defined as this necessary transitional multi-effects unit.
It is. It took the ME5's architecture and just dramatically expanded the engine. It was built directly on the ME5's success by adding more effects and, critically, deeper editing capabilities.
It was bridging that gap between the basic early processors and the newer, more sophisticated hybrid pedal-style units that were starting to hit the market.
Exactly.
Technically, this was a huge boost. It had an expanded DSP chip, a much broader effects palette, and it jumped to over 200 presets.
More than doubling the ME5's capacity.
And that technological investment allowed Ball SS to include features that giggy musicians have been asking for, like external foot switch support and a more detailed display. It showed Ball SS was serious about supporting more complex stage setups.
And that DSP expansion wasn't just about quantity, it was about quality. The sound quality leap in the ME8 was significant.
How so?
Well, it featured a noticeably richer modulation engine. The choruses sounded less brittle, the phasers felt more organic, and it offered better delay types. The result was presets that were far more polished and usable in a professional live context.
So its use case naturally shifted. It went from just practice rooms to serious band rehearsals and full gigging rigs.
Absolutely. Especially within those burgeoning late 90s alternative and post-rock scenes that were really defining themselves through modulated soundscapes.
Yeah, the ME8 was popular because it gave gigging players access to a much larger effect library and crucially, allowed for more subtle nuances in modulation and time-based effects.
If you were trying to dial in those layered atmospheric sounds that characterize so much of mid to late 90s music, this gave you that palette.
Reliably and affordably.
What's fascinating here, and it connects right back to our core mission, is that the ME8's massive popularity in the late 90s, it truly shows the prevailing market demand. This unit became one of Boss S's most popular pre-modeling multi-effects. This proves that there is a huge core segment of the market that prioritized readily available high-quality effects.
Just effects.
Designed specifically to enhance their existing tube or solid-state amps before the proliferation of digital amp modeling really took hold. They wanted effects, not amp replacements.
Right. It solidified the idea that the ME series wasn't trying to replace your whole sound system. It was about replacing your sprawling, expensive, and logistically painful pedal board with one compact, programmable, reliable unit.
But the core constraint was still there.
The core constraint remained. The ME8, despite its technological leap, still suffered from a menu-heavy navigation for deep editing, and crucially, it still completely lacked any amp or cabinet modeling.
And that lack of modeling, while it was limiting in some ways, it kept the focus on usability. The engineers had fewer parameters to clutter the interface with.
Good point.
Which meant they could dedicate the precious DSP to improving the quality of the effects that were there. It was a trade-off that historically we see paid off massively in terms of market acceptance for that era.
So now we cross the critical threshold into the 2000s, and this is where the ME series hits its absolute stride and defines the legacy that we remember today.
This is the moment.
This is where the conceptual shift happens,
Yeah.
moving the focus entirely from merely sequencing digital effects to ruthlessly optimizing the physical performance interface.
Yes. This is the moment they stopped trying to make a digital box that held effects and instead committed to building a digital box that felt and acted exactly like a traditional rugged analog pedal board.
They wanted the benefits of digital without the drawbacks of the digital interface.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The ME50, released in 2002, is the true game changer in terms of workflow and user experience. It introduced even more powerful DSP, improved editing, but the truly revolutionary leap
was the controls.
the introduction of those stomp-box-focused controls via dedicated physical wheels and knobs for every core parameter, allowing for instant, real-time tweaking.
That decision was foundational, and it was a direct counterattack against the dominant trend of the time. While competitors like Line 6 were gaining traction with their early POD units, which had revolutionary amp modeling but forced you into deep menu diving on these tiny screens,
Right.
DSS clearly recognized that guitarists inherently prefer turning a physical knob to scrolling through parameter lists on an LCD, especially mid-song.
The ME50 was deliberately positioned as the anti-menu diving rig. It was the perfect compromise between digital power and analog familiarity.
The architecture reflects that philosophy perfectly. While it had a respectable 99 user patches, the simplicity of the signal chain was crucial. You had 3 main banks of controls: drive, modulation, and delay reverb.
Each with its own set of dedicated physical dials.
Exactly like 3 separate stomp boxes. Everything was designed for the stage. Dedicated performance foot switches, stereo outputs, and a sturdy integrated tuner.
And the effects richness had grown significantly by then, too.
Oh, massively. The sources detail a really deep palette. Not just standard overdrive and distortion, but a highly usable modulation section with chorus, phaser, flanger, the classic Univibe sound, and tremolo.
And they dramatically enhanced the quality of the delay, reverb, pitch, and the filter wash section. The goal was breadth of high-quality effects, not necessarily modeling realism.
Exactly.
And crucially, its tonal profile was highly praised for its transparency and clarity. The overdrives and delays were deemed extremely usable for live performance.
Which was absolutely vital because, let's remind the listener, that ME50 still had no amp modeling. So if you were running a high-end Fender Twin or a Marshall JCM, you wanted the ME50's effects to integrate cleanly and transparently with your existing tube amp tone, not digitally dominate it.
So we need to address this critique about repeating the lack of modeling. In the ME50 era, that wasn't a flaw, it was a design strength.
It was a philosophical statement. Bios S was building the ultimate pedal board replacement for the 80% of gigging musicians who already owned and loved a physical amp.
Its significance can't be overstated. The ME50 became a true widespread staple. It was adopted globally in practice spaces, small gigs, specifically by players who absolutely prioritized the stompbox feel and quick recall over the need for internal amp simulation.
Totally.
I think we need to challenge that idea for a moment, though. If the Line 6 POD came out in '98 with amp modeling, and the ME50 came out 4 years later in 2002, still without it, was BISS being willfully resistant to market trends, or were they questioning the fidelity of the early modeling at that price point?
That is a superb question, and the sources suggest both elements were at play, but the emphasis was on production priority.
Okay.
BOSS and Roland already had the GT series, which did feature early modeling, but those units were more expensive and often suffered from the same menu diving complexity the ME series was trying to avoid.
So to integrate quality modeling into the ME50's simpler DSP while keeping the price accessible would have required a huge compromise somewhere else.
A huge compromise. Either in effect quality or interface simplicity. They chose to preserve the interface and the effect quality, thus maintaining its role as the ultimate amp enhancer. It was a conscious decision to serve the largest demographic, the player with a decent amp but no complex pedal board.
So if the ME50 was the revolution, we moved swiftly to the ME70 in 2005, which was really a meticulous refinement of that successful concept.
It didn't reinvent the stompbox interface, but it added necessary digital depth.
Right.
The ME70 focused squarely on deepening the digital effects engine and making the workflow more flexible. It featured a larger, more informative display, much easier navigation for patch programming, and a structure that allowed for much more sophisticated effects routing.
We see a significant DSP boost here.
A big one, yeah. And it enabled what the sources call true chain block editing.
That technical term, true chain block editing, is critical. We need to clarify what that meant in practical terms for you, the listener. What could you do on the ME70 that you couldn't do easily on the ME50?
Well, on the earlier units, the effects chain was often fixed. Drive always came before mod, delay always came after reverb or something like that.
A rigid order.
Very rigid, a constraint of older DSP systems. True chain block editing on the ME70 meant that within the digital structure, you could, for the first time in the ME series, change the order of the effects blocks.
So you could run a delay into a phaser?
Or flip the order of your modulation blocks, allowing for much more creative and unique sound design. This was a massive step toward rack unit flexibility, but housed in a stomp box shell.
The features really demonstrate that depth. It expanded delay and reverb types, adding modes like reverse delay or warmer play reverb.
And critically, it included 3 separate assignable modulation blocks alongside enhanced pitch effects.
Which, for a player who relied heavily on complex layered modulation, say, an ambient guitarist, this was a truly massive upgrade over the simpler single mod section of the ME50.
Oh, huge. The ME70 therefore served multi-effects needs exceptionally well for the professional live performer.
And the source notes mention a surprising use case.
They do. It was considered very good for processing keyboards and synthesizers too, thanks to that rich effects engine, the full stereo output, and the ability to handle line-level signals cleanly.
Yet, despite all this depth, the better display, the true chain editing, the advanced DSP, we are still dealing with a high-end multi-effects unit that still did not feature full amp modeling or cab simulation.
It's the last unit in the traditional ME lineage to hold that line.
And that position, in 2005, proved that a substantial, sophisticated market still existed for these advanced, performance-focused units built to leverage a player's existing high-quality amp.
The ME70 was the last stand of the effects-only philosophy within the ME line. It stood as a high-water mark for combining analog-style control with profound digital flexibility. It said clearly, "We respect your amp, and we're just here to make it sound better."
And from a design perspective, that balancing act, finding the sweet spot between clear screen feedback and maintaining the dedicated physical knob control, profoundly influenced the UI of later, more advanced processors across the whole industry.
It really set a standard that accessibility does not have to come at the expense of powerful editing.
So now we come to the final processor in this traditional series, the one that finally introduced the missing element to the platform and, you could argue, cemented the ME series legacy worldwide.
The ME80.
The ME80, released in 2007. This is the moment BOSS decided to pivot and embrace the all-in-one future.
The ME80 is rightly described as the pinnacle of the traditional ME series and maybe its greatest commercial success. It was the last major iteration before the industry shifted entirely towards even more complex, screen-dominated digital platforms.
And its success hinges on one crucial, long-awaited addition.
That's right. Finally, the introduction of a complete amp modeling engine, which was derived from the technology in their higher-end GT series.
After all those years of providing effects only, the ME80 included basic but highly usable amp types and drive models.
And this transformed the unit from an advanced pedalboard replacement into a true, standalone, all-in-one rig.
Something capable of going direct to front of house.
Exactly. This change was absolutely necessary to meet the evolving needs of the modern gigging musician. It addressed the core requirement of players who didn't want to carry a heavy amp at all.
Or those who needed reliable, high-quality direct-to-PA sound for small venues, rehearsal spaces, or fly dates where you can't guarantee the backline.
The timing was perfect. Digital modeling had matured just enough to be truly useful and musically satisfying in a compact, mid-priced unit like this.
But what made the ME80 so specifically beloved wasn't just the modeling. It was the physical architecture that housed it. OSs didn't sacrifice the core ME philosophy simplicity and immediacy for the new features. Instead, they doubled down on intuitive control.
That's the key differentiating factor. The ME80 is famous because its control layout perfectly married the amp modeling with the stomp box interface. It featured dedicated knobs for every major block.
Not just drive, mod, and delay.
No, but also dedicated physical controls for EQ, reverb, even presence. This made real-time tweaking feel entirely intuitive. It operated exactly like a collection of separate stomps and amp head, all integrated into one chassis.
Just think about the practical difference that makes on a dark stage. You can adjust your master gain or your delay feedback on the fly without ever entering a single menu.
That immediate tactile feedback was essential for live performance. It far surpassed the menu-driven editing required by most of its contemporary competition, even those with superior modeling fidelity.
And the performance area was built for maximum utility. 6 massive foot switches, mapped for flexibility. You could seamlessly switch between patch control, changing everything at once, and effect on-off, turning individual blocks on and off like true stomp boxes.
And it had dedicated tap, tempo, and looper control in the final retail versions. For a live guitarist, that immediate tactile control is just invaluable. It represents the culmination of 12 years of interface refinement.
And the tonal coverage expanded dramatically because the amp models covered the essential range needed for pretty much any gigging scenario.
Yeah, we're talking reliable emulations of clean Fender-style voices, the classic British crunch tones,
Marshall Vox territory.
modern high-gain distortion for metal and heavy rock, and cleaner boutique voices. And these were combined seamlessly with that robust effects library and fully programmable patches.
So this broad coverage meant the ME80 was instantly relevant to nearly every genre. The use cases just exploded.
It became ideal for players who needed a true all-in-one rig, for those gigging without the logistics headache of a physical amp, for practice setups.
And especially for recording direct-in, offering DIW-friendly presets coupled with the included USB interface.
The commercial success was immediate. It became one of Boss's most successful multi-effect processors of its era. Exceptionally popular in fields that demand absolute reliability and simplicity.
Worship players, musicians running small gig rigs, and significantly fly-date musicians and students who needed professional sound without all the complexity or excessive cost.
However, to maintain our analytical depth, we have to balance the books.
Right.
While the ME80 was the pinnacle of usability, we have to acknowledge its technical considerations. The sources note that its modeling engine, while robust and perfectly usable, was still limited compared to later, dedicated, and usually more expensive flagship processors.
Like the Bosch's GT series or high-end Line 6 units.
Exactly.
And I think that's the crucial distinction for you, the learner. The ME80 wasn't trying to win a fidelity contest against highly specialized modelers that required hours of parameter tweaking.
Not at all.
It was trying to be the most accessible and usable all-in-one solution on the market. And it succeeded profoundly by prioritizing user experience and speed over the pursuit of minute digital realism.
It combined 3 things perfectly: robust, gig-ready amp models, a comprehensive effect library inherited from the ME70, and that signature stomp box-style performance interface. It didn't just meet a need, it created a benchmark for practical usability that the industry is still chasing today.
So we've covered the ground from the ME5 in 1995 to the game-changing ME80 in 2007. Now let's synthesize the entire series. So what does this all mean? What does this evolutionary track, particularly the delayed adoption of amp modeling, tell us about the relationship between guitarists and technology?
Well, it tells a fascinating story of stepwise growth in capability that was surprisingly conservative when it came to adopting the most powerful but potentially complex technology available.
Right.
ATEM continuously prioritized user experience and workflow reliability over simply chasing the cutting edge of digital realism.
So if we summarize that evolution through the lens of features, the ME5 and ME8 offered essential and enhanced effects power, respectively, but they absolutely lacked amp modeling.
They were pure pedal board replacements designed to be run through existing amps.
Then came the revolutionary ME50 and the refined ME70. These brought significant deep DSP improvements, truly revolutionary performance interfaces, and crucial features like true chain block editing.
Yet they still deliberately avoided full amp modeling.
They cemented their role as the perfect companion for the tube amp enthusiast. They actively resisted the trend of the all-digital replacement rig.
It wasn't until the ME80 that Bias finally married the two worlds, recognizing that modeling had matured enough to integrate seamlessly into their performance-centric design.
So it introduced high-quality amp modeling alongside very deep DSP and that unparalleled layout of physical performance knobs.
The ME80, therefore, was the unit that validated every single design choice that came before it. It proved that when the functionality was right, the interface was ready.
Culturally, the ME line achieved something profound.
It did. It provided accessible, everyday multi-effects for the masses throughout a complex technological transition period, the 90s and 2000s. It was the entry point for millions of players into the world of digital processing because it never felt like a computer.
It felt like a sophisticated, yet familiar pedal board.
Exactly.
It truly served as the go-to all-in-one rig for the average guitarist, especially before the truly deep flagship modeling units, like the high-end GT series, the Avid 11 rack, or the POD XTHD, came to dominate the landscape.
It was reliable, relatively inexpensive, and most importantly, easy for you to figure out 10 minutes before a gig started when stress levels are high.
Its greatest achievement was successfully bridging that philosophical gap between compact single stomp effects and the full standalone modelers.
It proved to the industry definitively that musicians wanted both high-quality digital processing and the familiar physical, tactile interface they grew up with. They didn't want to sacrifice immediate control for digital fidelity.
And that design choice had serious long-term downstream effects that we still see today. The ME philosophy balancing performance control with digital power directly influenced the trajectory toward later, more complex products.
Absolutely. The stomp box mode, or manual mode, found on today's highest-end modelers, which dedicates switches to individual effects on-off,
Right.
that owes a direct debt to the ME50 and especially the ME80's design ethos. They showed that, fundamentally, guitarists want to step on a button and know exactly what it does.
This focus on practical ergonomics provided a necessary counterpoint to the relentless pursuit of digital realism.
It really did. While competitors were spending their DS key budget chasing the minute characteristics of vintage transformer sag, Bell SS was spending theirs ensuring that the player could reach the chorus depth knob instantly and intuitively.
On stage, performance is king.
And simplicity breeds confidence.
Furthermore, the ME series demonstrated tremendous long-term value. I mean, even the ME50 and ME70 are still highly sought after by players who already own a boutique tube amp and just want high-quality, transparent digital effects they can adjust quickly.
Without having to pay for modeling features they don't need.
Exactly. The units are still functional, still reliable, and still provide that signature usability that defined them.
And that residual value underscores their legacy. They were built to last, both physically and technologically, because their core function-providing reliable, easy-to-use effects has never become obsolete, regardless of how realistic amp modeling has become.
The ME80 represents the ultimate realization of that vision.
Maximum flexibility delivered through minimum complexity. It remains the gold standard for that particular hybrid unit.
Looking back across these 4 generations, the ME series wasn't just about iterating on old technology. It was about highly focused innovation based strictly on user workflow demands.
By the time the ME80 arrived, it had proven that prioritizing performance, immediacy, and physical tweakability was a long-term winning formula. That deep focus on usability is precisely what kept the series relevant, even as raw processing power shifted rapidly around it.
It sets a high standard for on-stage usability.
A standard that newer, often more powerful units still struggle to emulate when they bury core functions under layers of menus and submenus.
It's a perfect case study in understanding the true needs of the player. A guitarist needs speed, reliability, and tactile control over exhaustive complexity on a dark, loud stage. The ME80 put 8 dedicated knobs right on the floor, and you knew exactly what each one did.
You could dial in a significant sound adjustment in seconds, a luxury most screen-based modelers still can't offer without pre-programming.
Precisely. And that, you, the listener, is the core takeaway we want you to carry forward from this history. The evolution of this series teaches us a lot about technology adoption in the musical world.
The best technology isn't always the one that sounds the most realistic, but the one that makes performance the easiest.
Thank you for joining us for this extensive deep dive into the evolution of the BOY-SS ME series. It's a fantastic case study in how simple, intentional design can often outlast complex, rapidly changing engineering.
We leave you with this final provocative thought, built directly on the ME80's legacy and its core design conflict. The ME80 was incredibly successful because when the technology matured enough to introduce amp modeling, BOY-SS immediately prioritized the physical controls, those dedicated, non-menu dependent knobs over chasing the raw modeling depth of its competitors. So given the state of the market today, where flagship modelers offer near-perfect sonic simulation but often require external editors or deep screen navigation, what critical feature or piece of physical control do you think is fundamentally missing from modern multi-effects? Because the focus is too heavily skewed towards digital realism, that pursuit of the perfect digital simulation, rather than prioritizing the practical demands of onstage usability and instant physical control.
It's something to mull over the next time you plug in and find yourself staring into a submenu instead of turning a knob.
We'll catch you next time for the next deep dive.